Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Quality Assurance Review QA in-service workshop for 2022. We have Ryan Cayazzo with us. Some of you may know him from various site visits, and he's with us to present. He has some great material. He's very knowledgeable in the realm of quality assurance, working with National Q. So Ryan, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll have an introduction from Maine EMS with their new license agent. So Ryan, why don't you just introduce yourself, and then we'll do the next introduction.
All right, sounds great. Good morning, everyone. As Corey mentioned, I'll be your presenter for the next 3 hours, maybe a little less. We'll see how the discussions go. Um, I can't see who's in the chat yet until we get the slides going, but I'm sure I'm going to recognize a lot of names. Many of you know me from the EFD implementation 3-4 years ago. I pretty much circled to almost every RCC and dispatch center in Maine at some point for that. So I was also the national queue analyst for many people who are going to be on this call. So I can't wait to recognize some of those names. For those of you who are not familiar with me, work with Priority Dispatch since 2017. I'm a project coordinator, software instructor, national queue analyst. I do all sorts of things for the Academy and for Priority Dispatch. Got my start in public safety in 1996 as an EMT and went into dispatch in 2002 as a public safety telecommunicator. Spent the bulk of my career, 15 years, in Newark, New Jersey, PSAP, using protocol, which is how I fell in love with this whole process. So today, I'm really ecstatic to have some information with you and some dialogue on this call. One thing that I want to just point out to you is that there's going to be 2 parallel tracks today. The Teams meeting that you're on, that's perfect. If you would like to participate anonymously with this presentation, go ahead to AHA Slides on a smartphone, tablet, web browser, tab, something, and go ahead and put this URL in or scan the QR code. You're going to be able to interact with me, especially if you're introverted or not into the whole unmuting thing in the COVID and post-COVID environment where everything is now remote. We find that this is a lot easier for people to at least participate. There will be quiz questions today. Good news is that you're all anonymous. You'll choose your username and your avatar. Won't know who you really are for that. Just ask that you keep it clean. Of course, that goes without saying for comments and for your feedback. But I think you're going to enjoy this format quite a bit, and I'll do my best to provide you guys with a really solid session. I'm gonna just go ahead and guess that this is going to be quite different from some previous sessions that you've had. I intend to be sort of taking over from how things went in the past when you guys had these semi-annual in-services. So I'll do enough talking later on, so I'll turn it back to you, Corey.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I'm going to pass it over to Melissa Adams real quick from Maine EMS so she can make some introductions. Melissa, go ahead.
Thanks, Corey. Good morning, everyone. Um, Welcome. I did want to introduce a couple of people that we have on the call with us today. Maine EMS has hired a new licensing agent. Jason Cooney is with us today. Jason comes from Topsum Fire, and he has some background in response plans in his area and working with his PSAP and dispatch center. With Topsum Fire on those things. So he'll be a great resource for Maine EMS as we try to implement that in other parts of the state. And Jason will be joining the EMD course in April with Corey to get a good picture of what we do on the other side of the radio and the phones. So he seems to be very excited to learn, and this is his first week. So if you call the office or email, you may hear from Jason. And the other individual we have with us today from Maine EMS is Mark Minkler. Some of you may have interacted with Mark a little bit. Mark is our EMS for Children coordinator. Mark is the one who sends out the Stork Awards for us. He does that whole program. And he has joined us today because recently I say within the last year or so, we've seen an increase in home births, and some folks may be wondering why. And Mark has some answers for us on that. Some answers on home births, and also some information on how we can interact with the professionals on scene during those calls. So Mark will have a presentation for us after Ryan's presentation if folks want to hang out for that. Some really good information.
All right, thank you very much. Back to you, Ryan.
All right, so this morning we're going to cover two main areas, and we're also going to look at some ProQA medical updates. We're going to talk about what we call the Q mission, and we're going to talk a lot about strengths-based feedback. Many of you have been queuing for a long time. We'll be getting some demographics from the group in just a minute, and who comes from where and all of that good stuff. But um, Q has evolved significantly in the past 5 years. When we went to Standards 10 and created a new curriculum for quality assurance, the focus was on not looking for deviations and looking to ding people, but it was looking to their strengths to provide feedback on how they can better utilize protocol. And that includes all disciplines of ProQA. So we're going to talk quite a bit about fire protocol this morning, in addition to medical protocol. I know many of you, your first love and interest is the medical side and not the fire side, but we definitely don't want to neglect the fire side. And there's some interesting dialogue to have about that. I am going to share with you these ProQA medical updates in a little bit. We are going to take some breaks, about 5 minutes each, just for some personal or natures that you need. But as this is a remote session, obviously, if you're on your Peloton, I'm not going to know, and that's just fine. You can continue on your Peloton. One thing I do want to also indicate is, although I'm on a noise canceling headset, I am coming to you this morning from my home city of Newark, and I live on a main thoroughfare. So if you hear a lot of siren activity or whatever, I apologize. I can't do much about it. The headset does block most of it out, but I don't hear those sirens anymore, but you might hear them. All right. We did my presentation intro. I would like you to please interact with this participation as much as you can. You're going to get way more out of it by some of the open-ended questions and quiz questions that I have for you today. So again, parallel tracks, you can have another web browser or tab set up. You can also use your smartphone or tablet to log into the AHA version of this. So they're going to be displayed simultaneously, but you can only interact on the AHA slides one. And you're going to be choosing your avatars and your names very shortly. So I do encourage it, especially again, like if you're one of those people that does not generally like to participate and unmute yourself. This is going to be great for you. So this is your semi-annual workshop. Go ahead and please join this quiz, and as soon as we get a bunch of players on, we'll continue onward. Just give it a few more seconds. All right, we got 7 players, and you can join at any time if you didn't join right now. Your first quiz question is on the screen. I gave this one 60 seconds just to give people time to acclimate to the new platform. Simple question. What is the intent of Q? And in case you were wondering, if everybody answers prior to the time expiring, we'll actually get the balance of that time back. So I give most quiz questions have 30 to 40 seconds before it times out. All right, 5 seconds on the board. All right, so for our warm-up question, awesome, 7 out of 7. The intent of Q is catch them doing it right. Awesome that everyone has recognized that that is our motto. And today we are going to walk that talk when we talk about strengths-based feedback for medical and fire pro QA. Some of you might recognize that the which are we going to nab on this witch hunt is actually one of the quiz questions on the EDQ exam. It's been removed from the exam a number of years now, but it was one of my favorites because it really represented the feeling of the agency at one point that I was working for. It absolutely felt like a witch hunt, that Q was just this nefarious thing to jam up your colleagues. And of course, we all know that that's not the intent, right? We want to enhance performance and do better on the next call. It's not about beating up a dispatcher because they didn't follow protocol or made an honest mistake. It's about providing some coaching and reassurance to them. All right, let's see who's on our leaderboard. Okay, we've got guess who in number one. Now, the way this leaderboard is going to work is obviously based on correct answers, but also based upon time. So if two people have a correct answer, but one was 8 seconds faster, they will actually win more points when we go through these quiz questions this morning. All right, so open-ended question for you. I'm curious to know, which RCC or dispatch center or other state agency are you from? Go ahead and throw it in. All right. I see lots of familiar agencies that I've worked with. Lewiston, Auburn, Holton, way up north. Yeah, I visited you guys about 3 years ago. Saco for sure. Cumberland, Oxford. Yeah, there's definitely quite a few people agencies that I recognize on here. So that's really great. Top of the morning to everybody on the call. All right, this is just a quick poll. I'm curious to know, for those who are active queues, what mostly do you queue? Medical, fire, or both? All right, glad to see that we're pretty much 50-50 for the most part, doing EFD and EMD. Of course, there's really not very much difference between medical and fire Q. Our standards are identical. It's just the examples might be a little bit different, and there might be some differences in situational awareness as we apply the standards fairly to our case reviews. All right, I would like you to please go ahead and rate this statement, right? There's three of them for you. Q is very important to my agency. Q is very important to me, and Q is very important to my dispatchers. All right. So it looks like, interestingly, Q is very important to almost everybody on this call. That's really awesome to hear. Q is secondarily very important to your agency. And just as expected, in the middle, right, we've got Q is very important to my dispatchers is really not so much. It's in the middle. Maybe it's hit and miss, right? I totally expect that. I do these types of presentations and work with agencies all over the globe, and it's everywhere, right? This is a response I typically see. But what we can do starting today is to start to change that mindset and narrative. And we're going to talk a lot about that, especially in our second hour, about how do we go about changing the culture where Q is just this draconian method of trying to Monday morning quarterback our dispatchers, right? We have to sort of look to see, is there a new model and a mindset that we can employ to try to make that curve shift over to the right hand side where Q is actually very important to your dispatchers, because that's always going to be a win if your dispatchers are engaged. All right, next question. I love being a Q. Go ahead and rate this statement. All right. So we've got two always, four most of the times, and three sometimes. So that's interesting, right? Only two always. I think a lot of us end up falling in the most of the time category or sometimes category. And there could be a number of reasons why that is. We all should go into this with the best intentions, but unfortunately, what ends up happening is our experience working with others in Q and delivering feedback, as one example, sort of sullies our view on Q. And we have to always be mindful of our wellness as quality assurance people as well, and sort of getting back to the basics of why are we doing this Q. Yeah, it's a state mandate, board of public utilities, yada yada. We have to report our numbers, all of that. That's not the reason why we do Q, right? But loving what you do, in a most of the time situation, whereas we want you obviously to be most of the time or always, can be a challenge, especially when there are barriers within our agencies. Maybe leadership doesn't support what we do. Maybe our dispatchers don't understand why we're doing this, right? If there's a disconnect in the communication and the mindset, it's just going to put us into the lower categories of maybe sometimes or never. I'm glad to see that we had no nevers. All right, go ahead and answer the next one, which is I feel very confident as a Q. All righty. So the vast majority of users did feel confident, 3.6 on average. That's really good to hear. We want you to be more up towards the 4 or 5, and we'll provide you with some information today that's going to help you. All right. And we're getting sort of to the tail end of some of these preliminary questions, is the most important part of Q. All right. So 8 of 9 have said one-on-one dispatcher feedback is the most important part, and one said reports and documentation. So I'm super happy to see that the majority does believe that that one-on-one feedback is the most important part of Q, and surely would support that notion. Yep, reports and documentation are very important to what we do, But we can have all the reports and documentation in the world. If they're sitting in Aqua or sitting in an email inbox, what good are they actually doing? There's nothing that will replace that face-to-face interaction with a dispatcher to go over a case and show them a better way to do it next time, or just to say, hey, you really knocked that one out of the park. And we're so impressed with the way this call was handled, right? Those are all wins when we can get to have that one-on-one dispatcher feedback. We're going to talk a lot about feedback today and the importance of the method that you and your RCC or other agency are using for that. All right, the aspects of Q that you enjoy the most. Go ahead and tell me what they are. Just use a couple of words. I gave you 60 seconds on this one. All right. So looking at our word cloud, overwhelmingly, a lot of people felt feedback was what they enjoyed the most. That's awesome to see. I love these examples, helping improve the center, recognizing interaction, learning, positive feedback, helping improve, and supporting on a personal level. Yeah, that's exactly where we're at, right? If we can support people on that personal level, Q becomes really easy. It becomes a part of what we're doing every day. That's just going to be second nature. So I love all of these examples in the word cloud. Learning and feedback, that's really what we're all about, right? We're not about that witch hunt. Positive feedback, all of those things really related. Great job giving me some feedback on that as well. Now I'd like to know what aspects of Q that you enjoy the least. All right. So we've got looks like equal number of votes for time reports and conflict. So we're going to talk quite a bit about conflict today and how do we manage that in a better way. Yeah, reports are just part of what we do. Unfortunately, um, they are sometimes time consuming and time, right? None of us have time. And that's one of the things that we have to look at when we're looking at a comprehensive queue plan is how much time can I allot per week and what are my other job responsibilities? Many of you are active dispatchers who happen to also be queues, and that can be very difficult to set aside time to focus on queue. So and I'm sure that you know that's part of why you're enjoying that the least, but hopefully after today we can start to kind of look at some better methods. All right. The estimated amount of face-to-face feedback sessions based on all cases that your agency reviews is all right. So we've got 2 for all cases, 2 for some cases, and 4 for face-to-face feedback. What's that? All right. So um, definitely something that we're going to get into in our second hour, but suffice it to say that you will hear me very consistently anytime that I'm on a presentation or at your center doing a follow-up visit. Face-to-face feedback is where it's at. If we're not doing face-to-face feedback, we are missing a golden opportunity to really have more interaction and a good working relationship with our fellow dispatchers, right? Nothing can replace having a conversation about a case. You might be the best documenter in the world, the best comment writer in the world, but if those comments are sitting in an incident performance report that maybe gets printed and shoved in a mailbox, that maybe gets emailed as an attachment, maybe gets uploaded to Power DMS or some other platform, you have no idea how that person is internalizing that feedback, if they're even reading it at all. So we really want to make a concerted effort to change that, at least for high compliant and non-compliant cases. The rest of it can be maintenance feedback, but we'll talk about it. All right. And now I'm interested to know, to jump off that conversation, is how does your agency provide feedback to dispatchers? Open-ended question. All right, we have quite a few response from here. We've got Guardian Tracker is used. Yep, we see that one all the time. Uploaded to performance management system, print their IPRs, PDF to their folders, no non and low compliance initialed and returned to me. Another one for Guardian Tracker with their supervisors, and email PDFs of the report, but often general discussion among the room. Oh, I like that's an interesting one with a general discussion among the room. You know, if you're in a dispatch center and your dispatchers are open about talking about their reviews, that is a really golden thing as well. We don't see it very often. A lot of people are very private and they don't want to share their cases with others in the room. I know that there are some agencies that I've seen where I've been impressed with the level of that. Thinking back to Biddeford, I don't know if anybody's from Biddeford on this call, but when I was there a bunch of times, I saw a lot of them discussing their cases, and I thought that was a novel approach because we can all learn together, especially when you're in sort of those small groups of 3 or 4 people at a time. So interesting. All right, the parts of Q that you struggle with the most. Go ahead and submit some submissions on that one. We've got quite a few interesting things on the board. Clarifiers, providing feedback to people I don't see on my shift. Yep, that's a common one. Getting motivated to do it. Always keeping it strength-based. Pushback from the dispatchers not liking the queue program. Oh yeah, we see that all the time, right? Time finding new ways to tell people what is good. Yes, finding new ways to say good job without saying good job, all right? That hackneyed expression. Feedback. Awesome. Yep, these are all things that we struggle with, and doesn't matter what agency you come from. Finding the right words to express what I'm trying to say. Yes. Discouraging when you identify the same issue over and over. Yes. And when those issues persist and you've talked to them 5 times or it's been documented 5 times and they're still not hitting the mark. Yeah, that's super frustrating. We're all on the struggle bus with that. So really good. Go ahead if you're able to and vote on some of these that you like the most, just to see where we are on that in the room. Yeah, we've got a lot for finding new ways to tell people what is good. Yeah, we'll look at that today too. And always keeping it strength based. Seeing the same issues. Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So we're very like-minded so far in this workshop, and we're going to build on that today and sort of talk about some of these. How do I get around all of this, right? How do I make this Q program better for my agency? There's a lot of ways you can do it. Looks like the number one here was just finding new ways to tell people that it's good. All right, quiz question 2 of 17. Let's move on. Corey's familiar with this question because I always ask it. Go ahead and tell me, which fast food restaurant do you think has the best quality? You can pick more than one on this one, and there's a technical reason why. Whoa, look at that. So this is interesting. We've got 6 votes for Chick-fil-A, none for KFC, 1 for Burger King, and 0 for McDonald's. You know what's amazing about this question is I ask this everywhere I go because it's a jumping off icebreaker. And I rarely see anything other than Chick-fil-A in the number 1 spot, which is really interesting and says something about them as an organization, right? Um, I agree. Chick-fil-A has the best quality of food and service and experience, definitely for customers. And there's a lot of reasons why, and we can learn a lot of lessons from the way that they do things. We can apply them to what we do in 911 dispatch. I'm always interested to see that rarely does KFC get a vote. I mean, if you think about that, how many times does KFC screw up your order? Don't mean to disparage KFC, but in my experience, I mean, you have to check the bag before you leave KFC. If you're at that drive-through, there's no blind trust in pulling away and knowing that everything that you ordered is in that bag. Chick-fil-A, on the other hand, you're more than likely to have that order correct at that window when they hand it to you and drive off and not have to worry that when you open the bag, you're going to be missing your waffle fries, your Chick-fil-A sauce. They're super diligent about quality overall, right? There's exceptions to every rule. Um, the one that usually comes in second place is McDonald's. And McDonald's is pretty consistent and does have overall pretty good quality as well. But Chick-fil-A definitely is number 1. All right. So what I want to know is what are the traits that these high quality fast food restaurants have in common, right? So if you chose Chick-fil-A or Burger King, what are the traits? Wow, so take a look at this. Customer service, customer service, courtesy, customer service, attention to detail, getting the order right, customer service, good sanitization workflow. Yeah, excellent, excellent. Yeah, these are all very important things. Go ahead and vote on which ones that you think are the most valuable for you. All right, we've got 6 in the bucket for getting the order right and good customer service, quality product. Awesome. Attention to detail got a lot of votes too. That's good to see. Courtesy, I like that one, right? Um, what's the Chick-fil-A statement, right? That they always say when you say thank you, it's my pleasure. It's just they're highly protocolized. If you think about just Chick-fil-A for a second, for those of you who have been and are familiar, they have a script that they follow. So we are not the only ones that follow a script, right? We fall into a bucket of a lot of industries that actually use scripts. You don't realize they're using a script, but the way that they greet you, the way that they thank you, the way that they interact with you on your refills, they actually have training, and they have to memorize the phrases and the scripting for interacting with their customers. So it's interesting that fast food has actually caught on to that trend that we've actually been using for almost 40 years in dispatch. Okay, so looking at our results, we've got looks like number one is that quality product and getting the order right. Yeah, I always say there's two types of people in this world. The first type pulls up to the drive-through, right? They get their bag and they go through the entire thing. They're unwrapping the burger. Are the pickles there? Are they not there? All of those types of things. And then the other type takes it on that blind faith and drives away. And I think most of us have been burned too many times in the drive-through, especially in the COVID arena where everything had to be drive-through. That yeah, with all those orders, something's going to go wrong. I think I need to at least make a cursory inspection of that order, right? Think about that. Right. So number one, we've got guess who in the lead on our leaderboard. All right. So remember why we queue, right? Why we're here today and kind of spending a lot of time together is we want to ensure that predetermined standards are met. Very important, right? We have standards 10, we've got protocol rules, right? They've been preset by the academy, they're consensus based. They are the reason why we actually queue and check evaluations. We want to follow best practices. Every agency on here has best practices, right? Whether it's policies, procedures, protocols, things that you do, you're using those best practices. I'm not sure if anybody on here was from Waldo, but I was interested that when I was up there, I saw one of the things they do is senior check-ins, right? For shut-ins and people that don't have family. I can't remember if it's once a week or something like that. That's a novel approach, right? Proactively reaching out to people in the community to find out if they're okay and just to kind of have a casual conversation. Many of you may also do that as well at your RCCs or dispatch centers. That is a best practice, right? That is being proactive, and it's definitely trying to make sure that we're providing great service to the community. But we also want to coach, educate, and inspire dispatchers to perform better. It's all about performance, but it's not retro performance, right? We're looking forward to the future to see how do I educate and inspire my dispatchers to better. And we certainly want to reduce risks for everyone, right? There's risks involved in everything that we do in 911 and public safety. Protocol helps to minimize some of those risks. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So I'd like to know what industries that you're familiar with that have the most focus on protocols and quality, right? So think about things that other industries. All right, we have quite a few people for hospitals and medical, followed by airlines, Nina, and travel. Yes, absolutely. Think about your airlines, right? Not, it goes beyond the scripted safety briefings that are the same pretty much on every airline and consistently delivered. It goes to your flight crews. It goes to pre-flight checks. It goes to all of the things that go into operating an aircraft, right? It doesn't matter if a pilot has 20 years on the job. She or he, before landing, has a physical checklist. And they go over that checklist, even though they may have done that hundreds and thousands of times to make sure that all of the steps are completed. Takeoff, same thing, right? Think about in hospitals prior to a surgery, there is a protocol that's being used. If you're having surgery on an arm or a leg, they Sharpie that body part to make sure that there's no doubt as to where we're operating. They have checks and balances in place for everything, medication management, discharge, um, everything. So we're kind of borrowing a lot of things from the medical and from aviation as well, because they're all focused on safety and consistency and standardization. And that's really all that we do in Q is we try to maintain some standards. So there are a lot of highly protocolized industries out there: aviation, fast food, automobile manufacturing, right? Highly protocolized as well. Healthcare, certainly, public safety, 911 dispatch. So let's kind of just recap on what quality assurance is, right? Quality assurance is simply measuring our outputs versus a standard. That is done through consistent case review, protocol rules and axioms, application of Q performance standards, and objectivity. You're going to see I've got a little asterisk next to objectivity because many of you recognize that Q is not black and white, and it absolutely is not black and white. There are some things in Q that can be black and white, but is many shades of gray, right? There are no two 911 calls that are the same, and standards are just that. They're standards to deliver and to review calls. But the standards don't always cover every single thing that can happen. And we're going to talk about quite a few examples today of where, yeah, it could go either way. And when things can go either way, and there's no clear rule, axiom, or standards violation or deviation, we need to give benefit of the doubt to the dispatcher, right? We need to use that 2 or 3 second rule where if you're reviewing the call and you don't know how to manage that, we got to give them benefit of the doubt because they only had 2 to 3 seconds in real time to actually process that information and do something with it. When we Monday morning quarterback them through Q, we're basically having the luxury of time on our side. And then quality improvement is simply making it better for the next time, using the past as a springboard. We're coaching, we're mentoring, we're encouraging, we're using that strengths-based feedback, and we're doing a great job. Ooh, let's start getting into some Q nitty-gritty. You said she's 87. The fire is in the shed are examples of what? All right, 2 said freelance questions and 5 said inappropriate clarifiers. Well, folks, the 5 have it. They are absolutely inappropriate clarifiers. And we're going to talk a little bit about those and freelances and what's the difference between them coming up. So, who's on our leaderboard? We've got Medic Minded in slot number 1, followed by Guess Who, and then Jessica Milliken. All right, so let's recap on freelance questions for today. Some of this will just be Q review. Some of it will just be interaction, but freelance questions are questions that are not in protocol. We have a standard about them in our universal standards. They do not clarify anything important. They don't address safety or situational awareness, which we've always enabled dispatchers to ask additional safety or situational awareness questions to understand what's happening. They add unnecessary call processing time. They delay getting to a send point. Yeah, if you're asking 2 or 3 freelance questions, the clock is ticking. You're not at a send point. And regardless of whether your agency dispatches based upon a send point or you do a pre-alert or an early dispatch, it does impact protocol's use when we get too involved in freelance questions. And we've got 2 examples here. One, has this ever happened to her before? Really not relevant in most situations. We don't really care about the history too much as the primary driver, at least for chief complaint selection. And how long have the fire alarms been going off? Does it make a difference whether it's 1 minute or 5 minutes? No, it really doesn't. Think about this. Every time we ask a freelance question, it's 3 to 5 seconds to ask the question. It's 2 to 5 seconds for the caller to give a response on average. And then it's an additional 3 to 5 seconds for us to do something with that information. We get 2 or 3 of those and we're at 40, 50, 60 seconds that we're tacking onto that clock. So for those dispatchers who are protocol takes too long, a lot of times it's because they're asking a lot of freelance questions that have no importance on the coding of that call, right? They might be nice to know, they might be curiosity questions to know, but they don't actually have an impact on the way that that call is going to be processed to get to a send point and to give appropriate instructions for that particular situation. Here are some examples of things that are not freelance questions. Okay. Where is the person who assaulted him? It's a law enforcement question. We've always been able to ask things like that, right? That's important for me before I send EMS into that call. I understand you're not there. I need to get some important information for the responders. Just answer as best you can. How many of us struggle in EFD with third-party callers? who are no longer at the scene of an outside fire, a motor vehicle accident, vegetation grass fire, right? They didn't stop. They have limited information, but we don't assume they know nothing, right? So we use an enhancement. I understand you're not there. I'm going to get some information from you quickly for the responders. Just answer the best you can. And now I can ask my key questions, at least most of them, and get a better understanding and not assume that they don't know anything because they're not on the scene. Okay. Please take me off speakerphone. It's not a freelance. You can't hear the caller and there's a lot of background noise. Yeah, certainly take them off. What do you mean they won't leave the building? Are they trapped? Okay, all of these are actual examples of things that I hear in my many roles with Priority Dispatch, mostly from QPR, Quality Performance Review, right? I have still work with a lot of agencies on that front. Perfect clarification, right? I asked, is anybody trapped in the building? They said no, but there's still people inside. So the call taker asks a follow-up. It's a clarification, perfectly valid. I want to know why they're not leaving the building, right? Making sure that they're not trapped, because that certainly does change the dynamic. On the flip side of this, we have our friends, the inappropriate clarifiers. And folks, I don't spend a lot of time on inappropriate clarifiers, but it is important to understand what it is in comparison to a freelance. An inappropriate clarifier is a minor deviation. You need 30 minor deviations in a call to make it non-compliant if there's nothing else wrong with that particular call. So we don't spend a lot, I don't spend a lot of time on them. I look at the bigger picture, your majors, your moderates, your critical deviations. Here are some examples of inappropriate clarifiers, right? She's breathing, correct? Well, that's leading and assumptive. I'm making an assumption and I'm trying to get the caller to agree with my assumption. You said the dumpster is on fire? Okay, we're parroting back to the caller, which we don't have a standard about, but it's now leading. It's leading and parroting. So it is going to fall into that inappropriate clarifier bucket. I take it she's not violent. That's also leading and it's assumptive, right? We want the caller to agree with the statement that we've provided because we don't want to have to make this a law enforcement call. Maybe this is a psychiatric illness that gets simple EMS in your agency without law if there is no aggression or violence. No one's trapped. That's also leading and assumptive, right? So something that's known and parroted in a leading manner or something that is assumed by the dispatcher is going to be an inappropriate clarifier when we refer back to it. And many of us are not marking inappropriate clarifiers. And this goes across the board. Agencies I work with, accredited centers of excellence, we find a lot of times that they're just not marking these in Aqua. But we really do need to start marking them in Aqua. There's a spot on every section except final coding and customer service where I can mark an inappropriate clarifier. And we should do so to look at the trends, right? Because if I'm likely to use inappropriate clarifiers in general call taking, I'm much more likely to use inappropriate clarifiers in the context of a key question being asked on medical or fire, which means that that key question is probably going to be asked incorrectly instead of inappropriate clarifier. Question 4, a dispatcher who parrots something back to a caller will recover an inappropriate clarifier if they do what? All right. I am super glad to see that almost everybody got end the question with, is that correct or is that right? Right. And so take a minute just to understand what we're saying here. If I end a question with correct or right and there's no verb, it is not a question, it's a statement. So, yeah, are we nitpicking? Absolutely, we're nitpicking, but we're nitpicking for a reason. Think about this. When a caller is in distress and they're emotional or they're seeing something and experiencing something that they're trying to articulate into words in our blind environment of dispatch, if we just say, parroting statements and end them with correct or right, they're likely to agree, even if that's not the case. And there's a lot of reasons in the psychology of a 911 caller why they're going to agree with that. The risk is that we're going to have that agreement when it's not true, and we're going to put bad information in for responders into ProQA, right? That's going to go back to CAD. So although it's a technicality, it's an important distinction. There's a difference between saying, is that correct versus correct, right? And we do need that verb phrase in there to actually turn that into a question. Otherwise, we're incurring the risk of a miscommunication. And when we add those extra words in there, is that correct? The caller is more likely to think about the statement before they respond to that statement. So these are some of the tips that I'll be sharing today are how do we articulate back to our dispatchers why we're marking things as inappropriate clarifiers and not just to say, well, the academy says that you can't end it with correct. Gosh, I hear that every week. I never get tired of hearing that. But give them the reason why. Everything in protocol has a reason for precise word choice. If you think about the word exactly, how many that times that comes up in protocol, completely alert, right? Things like that. Precise word choice for a reason. All right, medic minded in number 1, Jessica in number 2, and T, I guess maybe that's for Tiger, is in number 3. Okay, so here are our clarification best practices, right? Objective clarifications. Tell me again to make sure I've got it correct. How old is she? We've all been on the line with callers where we say, tell me exactly what happened, and they give us the verbal diarrhea of what happened back in 1995, right? We need to refocus them. A lot of times they give us the age early in the call. If they give us the age early in the call and we forget it, and now we're at the age question, instead of saying, you said she was 87, right? I can simply just say, tell me again to make sure I've got it correct. How old is she? It's a gentle way to introduce a question that you think you know the answer to, or that you once upon a time knew the answer to, but you just want to be sure. And this is an objective way of introducing that question so that they don't say, I already told you, you're not listening to me. I said she's 87, right? We've all been on the receiving end of some of that before, right? So we want to make sure that we're acknowledging from the caller. Please repeat her age to make sure I've got it correct. Yeah, no worries. I heard you say she's in a lot of pain. Tell me more about what's happening, right? If the answer to tell me exactly what happened or the voluntary statement from the caller before we ever launch protocol is that someone's in a lot of pain, that's not enough information for us to process that call. Some of us might be inclined to say, ooh, I'm going to go to sick person, but we need to clarify. Tell me more about what's happening. Acknowledge what they said. I heard you say she's in a lot of pain. Now I'm curious as the dispatcher. I want to know where that pain is because there's a big difference between chest pain and pain in my left toe. Okay, I understand there's a fire. This is very important. Tell me exactly what happened. Or how about, I understand there's a fire. This is very important. Tell me exactly what's happening. There's no difference in protocol between what happened and what's happening. You can alter those statements based upon the fluidness of that situation. And what do you mean by he's in crisis? I've been hearing a lot of these types of statements over the past few weeks, and I'm super happy to hear them. Anytime we tell a caller, "What do you mean by?" and then we recycle what they told us, that's a huge win for us because we're asking for clarification. And this one I like in particular because somebody being in crisis is too vague. What does that mean? We might think it's a psychiatric crisis. It could be a sickle cell crisis. It could be some other medical malady or thing that they're calling for. So we always want to get more specifics. And even if it is psychiatric and they're saying he's in crisis, I want more information. And when I say something like, what do you mean by he's in crisis? The caller might open up about weapons. They might open up about what that particular caller, a patient is doing in terms of acting out or acting aggressive, right? And that way it helps us to answer key questions without having to ask every key question or verbalize them to the caller, right? Because I'd rather get a better story at the forefront of case entry, whether it's a medical or fire call, than to have to go and discover it later on. The better information you get from the forefront, the smoother the call is going to go downstream. Our most skilled dispatchers really leverage tell me exactly what happened and any clarification to a vague response to that before moving on in protocol. It is the most important part of protocol, right? Is getting the story in an objective, non-leading manner. That's why we don't say things like, what's going on there today? That statement gets us impression and opinion and diagnosis. We don't want any of those things. We want to know exactly what's happening or happened. And we, as the trained telecommunicator, EMD, EFD, we're going to make decisions on navigation based upon the objective things that the caller is telling us is wrong. We can't see through the phone. We're in that blind environment of dispatch. We're relying on the caller, but think about how much impact we have on those callers. So when you're providing feedback to your staff on a chief complaint error, it doesn't matter what it is, You need to explain to them most of the time how they could have avoided choosing that wrong chief complaint. 50% of the time, it's just a rules knowledge gap. The other 50% of the time, it's because the call taker assumed information and didn't clarify. Oh, I need an ambulance right away at 123 Main Street. My grandpa's real sick. And then they get into Pro QA and they don't even use tell me exactly what happened. Oh, they said he's sick. I'm going to go to sick person. I'm going to go to sick person. Right? We all have those dispatchers that camp out on sick person. They said that word. They said sick. That's not really doing right by our patients. We need to clarify. Tell me what you mean by sick. Tell me exactly what's happening. I heard you say he's sick. I'm referring back to a known fact that they told me, and I'm pivoting over to getting more objective information so I can make an informed decision. This patient doesn't belong on sick person. Because as much as we might be fans of sick person, we've all memorized that protocol to death and it's predictable. If they're having chest pain, I'd rather know at case entry because that's going to save me 3 key questions that I'm going to ask for nothing and take a shunt over to chest pain anyway. Get it right from the beginning. Give this feedback to your dispatchers. They're going to be appreciative. Okay, which of these is the best clarifier when the caller blurts out pre-pro QA that our boyfriend needs an ambulance because he's sick? Okay, 7 out of 7. Spot on. I understand he's sick. This is important. Tell me exactly what happened. Get that objective criteria and you make the decision. Don't let the caller drive. All right, our leaderboard. Let's see who's in number one. Oh, we got Jessica Milliken in number one. Let's go ahead and pause here. Corey, let me know if there's anything in the chat, and I just want to allow for those who do want to interact by voice. I want to see if there's any feedback or questions so far on anything that we've talked about.
That was just tech issues, so no questions right now.
Okay. Anybody want to unmute and give any feedback on clarifiers or freelances or anything like that? We've got 11 participants this morning on AHA. That's great. All right, we'll move on. A caller reports, I've got a lot of smoke coming from my basement. Question 6. The most appropriate action for the dispatcher is what? A lot of smoke coming from the basement is what they said. All right, we've got 3 who say select the chief complaint 69 structure fire and follow the traditional pathway. And we've got 5 who say use the echo fast track at case entry 4. Yes. So the 5s have it, of course, right? We do want to use the echo fast track. Remember what our definition of a structure fire is: caller spontaneously reports smoke, flames, or fire in or coming from a structure. And with a few notable exceptions, we are not going to question that too much at case entry. We want that to go out as a 69 echo, and we want the earliest possible dispatch. It is what we call a 0 question send point. So we're going to talk a little bit about this example in the next few slides. Okay, Jessica followed by Monique and followed by T in the lead. Okay, question 7 of 17 is, if the dispatcher skips the fast track, what is the impact on compliance? Okay, everyone has answered. Looks like we're pretty evenly split on this. 4 say the final coding level of the case can be recovered by using an echo level override at the send point, and 4 say the case can still be high compliant. Okay, so skipping a fast track will definitely not make you compliant or high compliant, right? Skipping a fast track is a moderate deviation. However, the final coding level can be recovered by using an echo override at the send point, right? So tell me exactly what happened. I got heavy smoke coming from my basement. I don't use the fast track. I go to 69. I'm going to get a 69 delta. Think about this. We only have echoes and deltas on structure fire. When I get to my send point, I have an echo override on my send point, right? A lot of us don't even look at what's in that list of determinant codes when we hit that send point. We just accept whatever ProQA says, and we shouldn't do that. That is a pause and reflect moment. And that's what we need to be teaching our dispatchers. Don't always just go with the send point. If your situational awareness indicates that we have a better code or an override to a higher level, use that higher level. So I can still get a 69 echo from the send point, although it took me 4 questions to get to that send point if I go the long way on structure fire. And I will avoid a level deviation. If I don't do that, I skip the fast track and I get my final coding wrong, which is a critical. The call is sunk from there. It's going to be non-compliant. So there's a direct relationship between fast track use and final coding. And what we're saying is that if you forget or you realize at that point, you know what, I should have chosen that fast track and I didn't, let your dispatchers know. Go ahead and use the override, the 69 echo override. That way, your call can at least be partially compliant, right? If nothing else in the call is done incorrectly. So that's another learning takeaway that we want to make sure that we're giving to our dispatchers. All right, Jessica's now also in the lead. Okay, question 8 for this morning. In this case, to choose the sub-chief complaint, the dispatcher may ask what type of building is involved at case entry if it's not obvious. Interesting. All right, so 3 say false and 5 say true. The falses have it. And let's talk about why this is, because sub-chief complaint is a hot topic. If I don't know what the sub-chief complaint is, because I don't have enough information, I don't want to ask a key question earlier in case entry, right? This is true on all protocol, not just structure fire. Think about this. I might be on a medical call and I might be inclined to go to 12, type in 12 at the bottom of ProQA, and it's going to give me the sub-chief complaints for seizure. And if I don't know that that's a generalized seizure, I don't say, oh, is this a generalized seizure? I skip the sub-chief complaint and I let key question 1 come up naturally. Okay. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. And Jessica's in the lead. Here's what I'm talking about. I put in heavy smoke from the basement and I went to 69 and I've got this pick list. Now, 50% of the time, the dispatcher should know the type of building. It's evident from the address for most of our service areas. If it's a school, a hotel, a business, a single family house, you pretty much know, and you can use your knowledge of the structures in your community without having to ask that question. So that's there's no worries there. But when you don't know, let's say you're in a large service area or something like that, we don't want to be asking this early on. We want to let that question come up naturally because it is key question 1, which is what type of building is involved. But the reason why we don't want to do that is we don't want to get ahead of ourselves and start using questions in the inappropriate area on case entry that actually belong in key questions. We can get the sub-chief complaint in most of our cases, but let it come up naturally in the key questions. On the Q side of the house, right, when we're looking at key questions, the bottom section there is where we're evaluating the correct sub-chief complaint or not. And we have a pick list. We can click on sub-chief complaint list, and it's going to tell us what the call taker saw at the bottom of case entry. And we should be evaluating based upon that. And so if the correct subchief complaint is not chosen, we need to be marking this. I'm always surprised that a lot of very experienced Qs are not marking subchief complaint at all. They are just skipping or omitting that section. It is pretty important. It's probably more important on the medical side than the fire side. On the fire side, they tend to be the type of structure that's involved. But again, most of the time that information should be apparent from the address or familiarization from the call taker with that particular address. Here's a medical example. Caller says, I was in a car accident yesterday, and today my chest really hurts. Which chief complaint? And I gave a little bit more seconds on this one because this might be deceptively complex. All right, 4 said chest pain and 6 said traumatic injury. Wow, nobody chose sick person and nobody chose traffic incident. So let's talk about this example because in our world of Q, we're always accused of being inconsistent. I'm sure some of you are smiling right now, and go ahead and give me an interaction if you've had your dispatchers say, Q is just so inconsistent and it depends who marks the call. And yesterday I had a call and did this, and today I did this and they didn't mark it. That hackneyed expression never goes away, right? It's just inherent in what we do. But I want you to think about this as an example philosophically, right? We're all just talking about the philosophy of Q this morning. We have what I call a rules conflict with this statement because for those of you who chose chest pain, you're not wrong, right? We have a chief complaint selection rule that says that priority symptoms essentially come first, right? We have lots of other rules in here. We're going to look at them in a second, but not everything is as what it seems, right? And we can have a call type fall into multiple buckets. In fact, if somebody on here had selected 29 for traffic incident, I think we'd have to give them credit for it because technically we have a rule about the mechanism of injury and traumatic injuries. The problem with this question is the timing, right? This car accident happened yesterday, and today my chest really hurts. So I want, as the call taker, putting myself in that shoe for a second, I want to assume that the chest pain is related to the accident, but how do I know? So if my call taker selected chest pain because she or he thought, well, that chest pain could be related to the car accident yesterday, but maybe they have a heart problem today. Maybe they literally have a legitimate heart attack today, and they went to chest pain because of that, right? So there is no one right answer, and this is really our opportunity in the world of Q to start revisiting some basics. Is if something is not clearly wrong, it's probably going to be correct, and we probably have to be reasonable about it. You are going to love what's coming out this year in our EDQ standards. Well, most of you will, because we have a preface to standards 10 about being reasonable. And it's a beautiful statement. It's going to be released next month at the Navigator Conference in Nashville. Some of you hopefully will attend that. But it basically says that as Qs, we need to give deference in situations where there's not a clearly wrong answer. We have to be reasonable about it. And again, that's going to come at the expense of being called inconsistent, but we're trying to apply rules to each unique case. And again, no two 911 calls are the same. In number 1 is still Jessica. So let's look at these rules for a second and let's use our example of this chest pain. Right? Some of you might hang your hat on rule number 2. If the complaint suggests trauma, choose the chief complaint that best addresses the mechanism of injury. And I would say, yep, I'm going to give you credit for that. You went to trauma. That to you was the primary driving force. Excellent. Some of you might hang your hat on rule 6. And rule 6 definitely is dispositive here, right? If the complaint description appears to be medical in nature, choose the chief complaint protocol that best fits the foremost symptom with consideration given to priority symptoms. Now, for those of you who haven't looked at rules in a few years, chief complaint selection rules especially, this changed. There is a key word in this rule that was modified a couple of years ago, and that word is consideration. It used to say precedence given to priority symptoms. And some of you might be on an older version of ProQA. Please don't tell me if you are, where that precedence is still in the verbiage. Boy, that's a really old version of software. You need to upgrade. We'll talk about that later. But the foremost symptom with consideration, what we're saying here, and the reason why this was changed by the Medical Council of Standards is that there are lots of examples where just because someone is saying they have chest pain does not make it a cardiac chest pain. We look at the totality of the caller statement, the context of that statement. So it can be clear based upon the time of occurrence. If the caller is calling and he has just been involved in that accident and is having chest pain, likely that's related to the accident. Okay. And I can give consideration to priority symptoms, but I don't want to lock myself into a medical call. This is actually, in that case, it's a 29. It's a motor vehicle accident because why? Rule number 2 in that context actually is the rule that's going to drive this. We have a mechanism of injury. We need to cover our scene safety on that accident. So again, I'm kind of harping on the obvious, but no two calls are the same and context is important. The best practice and whereas cues we need to go is 2 things. Number 1, giving benefit of the doubt for pathways that could be both correct. There could be 3 or 4 pathways that could be correct. And number 2 is understanding and being reasonable to what the call taker chose and having that dialogue. That's why one-on-one feedback is so important. If you're one of those agencies where you're constantly being accused of being inconsistent, have more dialogue with your dispatchers. I guarantee you, after a certain point, they're going to stop saying that you're that inconsistent. It'll never go away completely. I promise you that. But when you have a dialogue and say, hey, listen, in this case, the reason we gave you benefit of the doubt was because it could have gone either way, right? We don't want to lock you into a rule and go through the motions and ask somebody 3 days after they've had a motor vehicle accident the key questions on Protocol 29. How stupid is that? None of those questions are relevant at that point because the situation is one of timing. So we have to look at all of these things in totality and make an assessment. Wait, we review calls not to Monday morning quarterback, but to provide feedback and coaching for the next time. That's what strengths-based feedback is. I'm looking to your strengths, but I'm also looking to coach you so that the next time you get a similar situation, you're going to handle the call in that similar situation the way that we've discussed. You can't really do that just by writing it in an incident performance report and sending it off into Guardian tracking, right? Even if they're looking at that, even you want to have that two-way dialogue if at all possible, especially where you've got a rules conflict, right? Because we want them to be better. There can also be a discipline conflict. Well, she chose EFD and a minute later got another call and another call taker went to EMD for the same call type. If you're having that happen in your center, which is not uncommon, Q can identify and help fix that issue and provide clear expectations. Hey, our center asks a clarifying question. When we have a motor vehicle accident, we ask, is anybody injured? And we let that drive 77 versus 29. Have those dialogues. Talk with your leadership and dispatch review committee. What discipline for overlap drives? And it's not just motor vehicle accident. We have a ton between the two. Chemical and hazmats, extrications. There's a lot of overlap between the two disciplines. So remember, a couple of things. Is Q or even protocol black and white? I will posit to you, no, it is not. It's many shades of gray. Can several different chief complaints be used? A lot of times, yes, this is the case. Sometimes it's clear, nope, there is one chief complaint only for this type of situation. Do we understand the dispatcher's mindset? Have that dialogue. If you're reviewing a call and you're saying to yourself, what the heck, why did they go here? And you don't understand it, have that dialogue. And it doesn't have to be after the review is complete. You can pause, you can go ahead and talk about it, right? A total train wreck might be a non-queuable call. What? What's a non-queuable call? A non-queuable call is one in which there are so many different types of deviations that it's almost impossible to accurately review that call. Then don't do it in Aqua. Pull them aside and have a dialogue, right? Ask questions, provide feedback. Don't look to give them 10 critical deviations because, well, the case came up in random, I have to do it that way. No, you don't, right? you're going to beat them up with Q, then we're missing the mark there. If it's a severe enough situation where they made several severe deviations, it might be that non-Qable call, right? That childbirth is happening in the context of a motor vehicle accident, which is a car into a building and the building is on fire. Okay, that's a train wreck call to begin with. Why are we queuing that? Why are we going to spend an hour finding all the deviations in places that the call taker didn't follow protocol? Have the dialogue instead. I promise you things are going to improve in your relationship between your staff if you can do that from time to time. It should not be a routine thing to have a non-queuable call, but they do exist, right? Can we give benefit of the doubt when there's no clear rule? We should, and that's what reasonableness is all about now. I'm going to give benefit of the doubt because I'm Monday morning quarterbacking you. I want to be able to give you that benefit. And are we being reasonable when we queue the call? Provide some feedback to your call taker. In the example of the chest pain, I had the accident yesterday. Today I'm having chest pain. Could I clarify that situation? And would that clarification likely yield me a better answer to choose the chief complaint? Absolutely. Absolutely. And that might sound like the acknowledge and pivot that we teach, right? I understand you're having chest pain from that accident yesterday. Please tell me a little bit more about that chest pain right now. Boy, oh boy, that caller might say, well, I'm a heart patient and I'm having some pressure in my chest and to my left arm. Well, that's dispositive. I'm no longer going to treat that as a traumatic injury and have to do the whole 6 hours time frame for that. Versus, well, I have a big bruise on my chest from the airbag. I'm 28 and I really want to get checked out. My ribs hurt. Okay, I'm more likely to go to 30 in that case. So the clarifications to some of these things are golden if we can do it.
Ryan, real quick, while we're here, maybe we could talk about the importance of the caller's statement. So particularly in your case about the chest pain, our case entry rules tell us, you know, there's a medical track and a trauma track, right? But if we have information and we're trying to decide between the two, it's a good idea to include that in the caller's statement, and that information can be passed along to EMS for their own differential diagnosis, right? They've got more time and different skills on scene to make that happen, but we should give them all of that information, and that builds trust within our system. So when we're doing this, we're also thinking about the consequences down the road.
Absolutely agree with that 100%, right? It's all about the story. And also, it's not just about protocol, but it is about preparing our responders. Many of you, your responders are able to see all of the information in CAD and from ProQA, the key question answers. We're painting that mental picture for them when we dispatch them or give them the update as to what this call is. If we're painting the wrong picture, we're changing their mindset, and that's right. Their differential diagnosis of thinking, well, you know, what are all the potentialities on this? And before they're even on the scene, they're thinking about these things. If it's a trauma versus a medical call, are there going to be scene safety issues? Do I have a pull down? Other units responding, other response agencies, et cetera, et cetera. We have to be always mindful when we're giving feedback of what is the consequence, right? What is the impact of following this track or pathway in ProQA versus a different path? And could there be a better way to accomplish that on the next one, right? Especially if you feel strongly that they chose the wrong track, right? If that call taker went to 29 and that motor vehicle accident was yesterday and you're having this discussion, I said, yeah, but the rule says if it's trauma, I'm going to go to the mechanism of injury. So that's where I went. You need to have a dialogue and you have to think about this. The timing of that event is what's driving that. 29 has seen safety questions and things relevant to a just occurred motor vehicle accident. If the accident happened yesterday and I'm no longer at that location, do those questions really make sense? Am I painting a picture for responders that they're going to a motor vehicle accident or that they're going to a follow-up to an accident that happened some time ago? It's no different than I got hit by a car coming out of the parking lot of Walmart yesterday and today my leg hurts. That's not a pedestrian struck now. That's a traumatic injury, right? We want to be mindful of the different pathways that we can take and exactly painting that picture for our responders. The acknowledge and then pivot is golden. We have to get out of this mindset that tell me exactly what happened is a one-time deal. And whatever they say is where I'm going to go. Callers don't always, no matter what we prompt them to say, give us a robust answer to tell me exactly what happened. I'm sick, I'm injured, I'm hurt. That tells us what, but doesn't tell us how. We're all about the how. I want you to think about it one last way. Caller says, I need an ambulance right away. My coworker is unconscious. We get into medical ProQA. Many of us won't even say, tell me exactly what happened. I heard the word unconscious. I've got what I need. Think about this. No, you don't, right? You don't, because is that a diabetic unconscious? Is that a fall unconscious? Is it a traumatic injury unconscious? Think about how many places in medical pro QA we have unconscious as a determinant driver. It's on a boatload, almost 50% of our chief complaints. But the context is key. The caller said my coworker is unconscious. I'm curious as to why the coworker is unconscious, so I would acknowledge and then pivot. I understand he's unconscious. This is very important. Tell me exactly what happened that made him unconscious. And now the caller might open up and say, well, he was on a third level scaffolding and fell off. Well, now that unconscious is not a 31, it's a 17, right? Think about how many different ways somebody could be unconscious. The context of that situation is instrumental in how we're going to paint that picture for responders and get an accurate send code, determinant code, and understand what's going on in that situation. Again, I'm harping on we can't take things at face value because we're in the blind environment. We're making assumptions that an unconscious is just an unconscious, and we all know that it's not. And that the key questions and the instructions for our caller are depending upon an accurate pathway in ProQA. It doesn't matter if it's medical or fire. Let's say in this chest pain example, call taker chose sick person. What coaching will you provide? I think we would all agree sick person was not appropriate. Right, we've got show them the rules and ask the case entry question. Yeah, sure. Ask the case entry question. Absolutely. Tell me exactly what happened. You can pivot over. If they have volunteered and opened up that gate to you before tell me exactly what happened and you don't want to use tell me exactly what happened, you can use a variation on that. Mrs. Smith, I understand that your husband is not feeling well. Tell me exactly what his symptoms are, because they volunteered to you earlier that they're sick. Tell me exactly what happens the best way, but you're not locked into tell me exactly what happened, right? I'm clarifying what should actually be an obvious answer, and I just want more information on it. That's something that's super important for us as a skill to do in our own call taking as queues, but to also provide over to our dispatchers in terms of feedback. We're going to go ahead and take a break here, a 5-minute break. We're at almost 10:30. So go ahead, please, and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and we're going to talk a little bit more about what we call the Q mission. We are right on time today. If there are any questions, please do put them into the chat or into AHA, and I can address those when we come back from the break. Corey, anything in the chat?
No, there was just a question earlier that Melissa had answered. We were talking about the quiz questions. There's nothing nothing pending.
Very good. All right, I've got 10:30, so we're going to restart. And before we jump back into the presentation today, I want to share with you some of the enhancements that you will see in ProQA should your agency update to the latest version and build of ProQA, which is 5.1.1.43. So if you're in your center or the next time that you're on shift at your center, I want you to note on the top left of your screen the version number. And if the last two numbers don't begin with a 4, you're on a very outdated version of ProQA. So we're on .43. For those of you who might be .30, .31, .32, you're on a really outdated version of ProQA. You need to get with leadership and talk about updating ProQA because you are missing out on a lot of wonderful enhancements that the Academy has released over the past 6 to 12 months, including one very important enhancement that I'm going to demonstrate for you on the breathing verification tool. So to get the most out of ProQA, you know that we keep evolving and that proposals for change on software and protocol are the way that protocol does change. So I don't want to know today what version you're on, but just for informational purposes, I'm saying to go ahead and check out your ProQA, both fire and medical. We're going to concentrate on medical today. I'm just going to show you a few things that I think you're going to like. Okay, now, first thing I want to talk about is there's something new in case entry. Okay, um, when I get to the tell me exactly what happened bar, I have something new in this list, and it is first party extreme respiratory distress. Now, we have always been able to get a 6 echo 1 out of case entry at the bottom of case entry by going through and completing that. However, if up to this point you have a first party caller who is alone and they're having that extreme respiratory distress, we want to use the Echo Fast Track. And the way that that's going to work is, well, first is understanding what does obvious extreme respiratory distress mean. So like everything in protocol, you see that we have a capitalized expression here. If I go to my additional information on here, and of course, let me pull this up. You can see, I'll put this at the top of the screen. We have a definition. It is a first party caller exhibiting signs, including but not limited to fighting for each breath, using single words or syllables to express her or himself, expressing extreme desperation, complete respiratory exhaustion, or thoughts of impending death. And this is not used all the time, of course, like most fast tracks are not. But if you have a caller and they're struggling to get the address out and they're having a real hard time breathing, you want to use this Echo Fast Track. This is a caller who says, I can't breathe, right? So the reason why a year ago we had you started asking, are you alone, was actually to set you up for these enhancements that were coming down the pike, right? Well, I don't understand why we have to ask a first party if they're alone. Here's one of those core reasons is we need to understand right away, because if they are alone, we're going to use this fast track. When I select the fast track, it's going to give me a 6 echo 1. So let me cancel out and make a new case and show you how this works. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and input a new case. and I'm going to choose first party extreme respiratory distress. Poof, 0 question send point. ProQA is saying send this out. Don't ask any questions yet. So I'm going to send this out as a 6 echo 1 ineffective breathing. And then I'm going to get a red box instruction, which we borrowed from EFD, early care instructions. I'm sending the paramedics to help you now. Stay on the line. Very important to reassure this first party of that right away. And then it's going to default to first party alone. And then you're simply going to obtain the age. Okay. So everything that we're going to ask is going to be basically yes and no questions. I got a 65-year-old male, and now poof, I can go right into my first party questions, right? And so many of you know that the caller party is extremely important in both fire protocol and medical protocol. In medical protocol, it changes the order and sequence of questions. It also changes the types of questions that we ask. We get a lot of blue questions for the call taker to know, right? We don't ever say, is the caller completely alert? That's a blue question we all know based on our experience dealing with the caller for the first 30 or 40 seconds that we're in the call. We're going to make that determination and we're going to move on from there. The key to this is that we have hit a send point. We already have a 6 echo 1 established. So if the caller is in extreme distress, am I going to necessarily ask them every key question or give them every post dispatch instruction? Heck no, I'm not, because I'm going to make their condition worse. Protocol was never designed to make somebody's condition worse. And there are some few examples like this where protocol and going through everything verbatim, we all love to use that word verbatim, even though it doesn't exist in our standards. It creates this environment where we're, I have to do it. No, you don't. You had a send point, right? Your caller's in extreme distress. Almost every key question is going to be obvious at that point based upon your interaction with the caller and the fact that they're in severe respiratory distress. Okay. Um, the caller party is also important on EFD. Are you at that location now? It seems like an inconsequential question, but it is not. And if you're on a structure fire and the caller is not at that location, your pick list and ability to get to things like chimney fire, extinguished fire, burned food go away. They're not even options anymore, because how can you verify that a fire is extinguished or burned food only if you're not there? Right? We take away pick list items. ProQA is dynamic. When we're giving feedback to callers, we need to explain why the importance of these key questions are in the order that they are in. And that's why caller party drives everything in ProQA. And in fact, this year, we're going to be due for a major release of medical and a major release of fire. That caller party is going to drive more impact downstream based upon the answer to, are you at that location now, or what's the caller party for the patient? It's just that important to get that correct, because, spoiler alert, EFD is going to be getting third and fourth party PDIs. What? That's blasphemy. Yes, we are. We're getting them. We've needed them for a long time, but it was a much more difficult task than one could imagine, because how do we know that somebody's not there, doesn't have instructions or an ability to relay information back to the scene? So it's coming, just like we have them now for medical. If your ProQA doesn't have third or fourth party PDIs on medical, you're on a really old version, and you need to make sure that you get with your leadership to talk about upgrading ProQA. So that is that first party extreme respiratory distress. I want to show you just a couple of other functions in here. How old is the patient? 65. Is he awake? No. Is he breathing? Yes. And now let's say I try to go to 26 on this. I get an alert. ProQA is now smart enough that it's saying to itself, you said the patient is not awake, but they are breathing. Why are you going to sick person for a person who's not awake? This is another level of safety that protocol is trying to catch up with mistakes. Most of the time, if we go to sick person, it's because they are awake. But ProQA is going to warn you now, for any mismatch based upon awake and breathing and a chief complaint that doesn't make sense, you're going to get a pop-up box warning. Now, you can override that warning, but it's in the sequences that this box popped up and you were warned, and you're going to see that. So the takeaway if your agency is already using this or you're going to use it, when you update, is it's just another level of making sure that we're doing the right thing for the patient. So I can select another chief complaint, and I can come down here and I can say, oh, I want to go to 31 for that instead, right? Now, the biggest change and enhancement, and there's really three that I'm focusing on today, we got two of the three down, is going to be the breathing verification tool. And for those of you who have struggled for years with the breathing verification tool, your life and your world just got improved in January when this came out. So first, let's talk about the breathing verification tool as it currently exists in most of the people's software who's on this call, which is, I want you to say now every single time he takes a breath in, starting immediately. And I can already hear the wheels turning. Oh my God, half of my callers don't understand this instruction. I end up having to relaunch the tool several times because they're not ready. Or when I say, did she take a breath? They say, what, huh? The tool has always been clunky. And we've had 3 iterations of that tool. So here's a long story short for once. The Academy did a massive research project on this, and they tried 4 different scripts, and they beta tested to see which script had the most meaningful impact when we gave it to callers. And we have a winner, and I'm about to show it to you. Check this out. Instead of saying, I want you to say now every single time he takes a breath and starting immediately, we have some new scripting. Okay, we're going to check his breathing together to make sure it's all right. When I say go, watch him closely and tell me each time his chest rises, are you ready? Go. Right? So there should be some applause on this one because this is a long time coming. But the Academy didn't change this on a snap basis. They did a lot of development behind this to make sure that the scripting would be the absolute best we can get it in the circumstances of the blind environment of dispatch. So I am super excited and about this. And for the first 30 days on the agencies that I've worked with who updated to this version of ProQA, the frustration level and went way down, and the non-compliance to this went way down. And we're seeing already that this is a much more effective way of getting the breathing verified on an unconscious patient. It's really golden. So if this is something that you're excited about, I'm with you. And if you don't have it yet, you want to, again, I keep saying, get with your leadership about it. I know there's a lot of older versions of ProQA out there in the world, and we need to start making sure that we're updating at least twice a year, if not more often. We release maintenance releases of ProQA pretty much every quarter. Some of those maintenance releases are easy and simple things, and some of them might have some impacts to final coding and response configuration. So we don't just willy-nilly update stuff. But if it's been a while, look through these because you're going to get the benefit of ProQA updates on that. Anyone have any feedback or questions on this version of Medical ProQA? Anybody excited about this? All right. So I will go back and we'll jump into the presentation. All right, Corey, can you still see my screen?
No, I just see you.
Oh, I clicked on share. Let me try that again. How about now?
There you go.
Okay, so I don't want to go back. All right, so let's talk about the Q mission. On your screen, I've got 2 agencies. These are agencies that I work with every week in my role as analyst for QPR. The one on the left, week to week, has about 7% non-compliance. The one on the right has about 60% non-compliance. Yeah, there's a difference of 5 cases. Think about which agency you would want to call 911 in if you're a resident. Agency A or Agency B, with the assumption that your queue is accurate and your dispatchers are performing at the level that you say. Because sometimes we over queue, sometimes we under queue, and some agencies are right in the middle. The agency on the left is an ACE accredited agency, right? And I'm not going to talk a lot about ACE today, but suffice it to say that there is a big difference in performance typically between an agency that's accredited versus one that's not. And I want to just throw 5 things into your mindset about accreditation, and then I'll shut up about it. Because listen, I've been to almost every RCC. I know the feelings on accreditation. Accreditation mindsets. That's what I'm going to call it. It's a mindset. I'm not saying you have to do it, but You want to think like an ace. You want to behave like an ace, because it is a commitment by leadership and your staff to deliver the best possible care, whether it's a fire call or a medical call, to your community, right? It ensures that best practices are implemented to meet what we call standardized care. We've gotten out of the business of saying standard of care, because that's really a legal term and a standard. It's standardized care, right? Whether it's that fire call for a structure fire or a hazmat spill versus an unconscious based upon a fall, there are standards built into the protocol and into quality assurance. When we follow those standards, which are consensus based, medical council of standards, fire council of standards, et cetera, we know that we're providing at that point the best possible scenario for that caller and situation. We provide clear expectations for dispatchers. You know how many cases per week you pull into queue and provide feedback on those randoms. It's also an external validation that your performance meets or exceeds all of those consensus-based standards. And finally, accreditation reduces risk to callers, bystanders, patients, victims, responders, dispatchers, your center, the state, right? We're all about reducing risk. And when we say risk, we don't just mean liability. That's one form of risk. We don't, it's not the main reason. It's just risk. We don't want to hurt a patient, and we don't want to tell them to do something that's inappropriate. We also want to keep our responders safe, right? Red scene safety questions in medical or fire are instrumental. If we skip those, we're not doing right by our responders by obtaining all of that information. We don't want to make assumptions. I would like you to please provide me with one example of a best practice that your dispatch center uses. Right, we've got a few answers on the board. We'll go ahead and I'll advance to the next screen and sort of talk about those. ProQA on all calls, business and 911. I love hearing that, right? I hear this all the time. Well, it came in on the 10-digit line. I don't have to ProQA it. But an emergency call could come in any number of ways. Why are we using a sort of like a loophole to say, well, it didn't come in 911, therefore it's non-emergency? Um, could come in by text message. What's the difference, right? A call that's an emergency is an emergency no matter how it comes in. It could be coming on carrier pigeon. We do want to ProQA all calls, business 911, if it's an emergency, right? Call back all abandoned calls. Yeah, certainly that's a standard. And meet one-on-one. Those are examples of best practices. They're industry standards that are set. NINA, APCO, the Academy, all three together produce very similar standards, and there's overlap between them, but they are very, very important for what we do in terms of saying that we have best practices. If you're an agency that has a lot of policies, procedures, and directives, you're using best practices if you promote them and if you actually adhere to those standards. Agencies that have stuff on paper that's in a binder that hasn't been looked at in 4 years or updated in 5 years, something like that, that would not be a best practice, right? These things need to be reviewed. They need to be updated. I would posit to you today, if your agency does not have a directive of some sort in writing about how you handle Apple phone calls and telemetry devices and apps that call 911 and all of the new things that have come out where those devices are activating 911 or an emergency call center that is relaying to you, um, you got to think about that, right? That's something new and evolving for most agencies that they're struggling with. How do I deal with this? It's a fall detector call. No patient contact. Do I go to 17 for that? Do I go to 32? Do I not do ProQA at all? Do I call back to try to establish contact? What if I have GPS coordinates that come back to a field and it's 3 miles away from the closest physical structure? Those are all things that you need to be considering that have come up in the past 2 to 3 years and that most agencies are struggling with. How do we deal with them? So the role of the queue is to ask yourself, Are you marking the answers to those questions correctly in Aqua? Does your own call taking match the way you review cases? That's a big one, right? You got to walk the talk. Do you understand the whys of protocol, rules, axioms, principles? Are you providing meaningful feedback to your dispatchers? And what are you doing to educate and coach your dispatchers? Right? What do you do to promote protocol use? Do they use the online college? Do they look at the magazine from the academy? Do they look at other resources like APCO and NINA publications? What are they doing to improve their use of best practices in protocol? And what are you doing to promote that as a Q? 50% of our job is case review. The other 50% is education, training, and coaching and mentoring of our dispatchers. And there's a lot of overlap, but it's our primary responsibility to provide that meaningful feedback. So Q strives to be objective and fair and growth oriented, certainly non-punitive. Our mantra has been catch them doing it right. Right. And that's our mindset is we don't go into a call saying, oh, look who Susie took this call last week. I'm going to ding her every which way I can. Okay, you're misusing Q if you're doing that. What you should be saying is, oh, Susie took this call. I have high expectations for how she performed on this call, right? Even if she's been low compliant or partial compliant or maybe even non-compliant, have that positivity going into it because your negativity is going to impact the way that you're scoring, for lack of a better word. I hate the word scoring, but it's really reviewing how we're looking at that call in totality. All we're doing in Q is evaluating, educating, and encouraging with emphasis on the encouragement. You can do this. You got this, that positive feedback that we need to give to callers. Question 10. Q should be used to do what? All right, 8 out of 8, coach and mentor. You got it, enough said. And Jessica's in the lead, right? So I want you to think about this way. What Q's purpose really is of course, clear expectations and a process for evaluation and feedback. We've got Aqua, we've got our methods of tracking all that. But really, the heart of this is reducing variance and increasing consistency throughout our protocols and call taking. When we achieve those two things, we are reducing risk substantially. We're correcting deficiencies as we go along, and we are encouraging excellence because we're looking at the variance and consistency factors. What we do not do and what we should not say is that we grade, score, or ding calls. And I hear this all the time. Oh, I graded you this way, or I scored you that way. That word ding, it never dies, unfortunately. But these are all very negative terms. We review and we evaluate. When we start to say things like grading and scoring, we're mathematizing and we're having these dispatchers internalize that Q is a negative thing. We're having flashbacks to 6th grade history exams and things and math tests, right? We're simply evaluating. Is it ultimately a grade and a score? Yes, it is. Although I would argue because we don't use percentages anymore, we're really not scoring or grading. We still are reviewing, even though in the background, of course, there is some math involved in Aqua to determine that compliance level. And it brings us to our minimum standard of acceptability, right? We know it's consensus based, but it's a specific standard for how a call should be handled. We have reasonable expectations. We have those best practices. We want to make sure that we're applying them every day to our queue. So when we talk about reducing the risk, right? Which risks? Well, safety loss, bad intelligence, incorrect dispatches, omitted or incorrect instructions, and poor or unacceptable outcomes. The number one complaint we hear from responders through field feedback is we didn't find what we expected when we arrived. They dispatched it as this, and when we got there, it was that. Now, as of both a field responder for many years and as a dispatcher, I would say that's unavoidable. There are always going to be cases where what we dispatched to you two, is not going to be what you find on scene. Either we had bad information or incomplete information, or the caller just outright said something completely wrong, or we didn't get the full story, which is most often the case, right? So that unconscious that we dispatch might be actually an assault, or it could be a fall if we didn't clarify at case entry. This is how it all comes together and why we're saying that that story is all important, right? So bad intelligence leads to issues of confidence downstream. We want our responders to have confidence in what we do. We're dispatching them. We're responsible for their safety and giving them that intelligence and situational awareness even before they arrive on scene. If we're consistently missing that mark, then there is a problem in our system, and we have to start looking at what are the root causes and how do we change our culture to make sure that we're more reliable. Again, we can't do it every call. There's always going to be some disparity. But if responders say, yeah, for the most part, it's accurate, then that's a huge win for us because we're reducing their risk and we're building trust. And that's an area of protocol that we really need to focus a lot more on. Trust and confidence are really key. Our call taker perceptions. How many of you have heard that Q is punitive or it's nitpicky, it's biased, it's fault finding? You know, that is the impression that we provide. Nitpicky is, yeah, I would say we are nitpicky, but we're nitpicky for things that matter. There is a difference between a freelance and inappropriate clarifier that we went over as an example. And we want to explain why that is nitpicky, right? It's nitpicky because language is important to how we process those calls. We're not looking for faults. We find faults along the way, but we're trying to look for things that are your strengths, which is why strengths-based feedback is so darn important. I want to tell you all the things you did well on that call, even if it's caller management and address verification or troubleshooting, because if there are deviations, it helps to point out what was done well. People respond better when we find more things right than wrong. On negativity bias, they're putting much more emphasis on the things that we say they didn't do well. And we're sort of in this trap where we're beating them up subconsciously or indirectly through our feedback that's written and verbal. We have to stop doing that if we're doing that, right? We want to be having this, what we call growth mindset. And most people in life fall into two camps. They're either intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. And this is a spectrum. So I'm trying to imply psychologically that you can only be in one camp and not the other. Like everything else, it's a spectrum. But for those people who are intrinsically motivated, they do it because of the love of it. They do it because they're passionate about it, that it's the right thing. It's an ethical thing. It's a pride thing, right? This is my self-expression that I'm internalizing what I do. I have value in the things that I do because it's the right thing, right? On the right-hand side are your extrinsically motivated dispatchers and people, right? And they are motivated simply by things like pay and promotion and perks and prizes and recognition, right? They crave those things. And not to say that, again, that you can't fall into both camps or be in the middle of the spectrum, but get to know, as you already know your staff, as to who falls into what camp. Knowing that is going to make your feedback all the more better. Your intrinsically motivated people are much easier to work with overall, in my experience, because you can have that conversation and sort of get to their goals. The extrinsically motivated dispatchers, you might need to have contests. You might have to have recognition. And I'm going to ask in a little bit what your agency does for recognition, because it is a very important part. Nothing breeds compliance improvement faster than a contest where there's a really good prize, and whether that's a day off or some form of pizza party or something that's tangible that people can actually work toward. Those are pretty effective motivators, and a lot of agencies do things like that to increase their compliance to fire protocol or medical protocol, or maybe a certain part of protocol overall. But getting to know your personality types is pretty key. And remember that you can't know what you don't measure, right? How you think performance is often not the case. A lot of your call takers might think that they're ace. I am the best call taker in the world, but their performance might not reflect that. And then you also have on the opposite side people who are like, oh, I did terrible on that call. Maybe they come to you and confide in you, hey, listen, could you listen to that childbirth call that I took yesterday? I really think I screwed up my pre-arrivals on it. Right? That's a huge win when somebody comes to you and trusts you enough to say, hey, pull this call. I want feedback on it, not because I think I did exceedingly well, but because I think I might have done something that was not to standard. That is a huge learning opportunity to focus review some of those calls. And for those of you who have had those experiences, that means you have the same type of trust that we want from our responders. Your staff trusts you that you're not going to review that call to ding them or gig them. You're going to review that call to give them feedback. They said, hey, I think I screwed up on pre-arrivals, or I could have done better. Listen to that call with them if it doesn't come up as random, and give them that feedback and say, hey, you know what? Actually, you did really well in pre-arrivals. The next time, though, that the caller says that the head is coming out and you're on the shoelace thing, did you know you could go to the target tool and select the panel that's most appropriate given that situation? I can. Yes, you can. That's why we have the target tool on the toolbar for things that happen out of sequence. There's no time for the towels and prepping mom if the head's coming out, right? So I want you to think of those examples where you can have dialogue and get with your call taker and say, okay, there are times where the protocol sequence does not work for some calls. Knowing the wisdom between the two is all the difference. That leads us into our topic of teaching them, right? We want to teach them and we want to reach them. Question 11 of 17 on your board. It's okay for the dispatcher to combine awake and breathing. Five seconds on the clock. Hey, time's up. 1 said true and 7 said false, right? So of course this is false. We do not combine awake and breathing. But if we mark a call taker for combining awake and breathing, which is one of the few double deviations in protocol, you're going to get a review for awake and a review for breathing as asked incorrectly. Are we explaining to our dispatchers why we do not combine awake and breathing? Because if we're not giving the context and the rationale behind it, we're marking things to mark things and we're going through the motions. We check the box to check a box, but we're missing the point. It's an educational point. Why don't we combine awake and breathing, right? So Jessica, again in the lead, let's revisit awake and breathing as an example of teaching moments. Here are some examples of deviations that we see all the time to awake and breathing. She's awake, yes? Leading. And he's awake, conscious? Leading and combining awake and conscious together, which we don't do. He's responding to you? I didn't ask about responding. The key question asks awake. It's a pretty basic question. Why am I getting into responsiveness at this point? That's a key question, right? On the breathing side, and she's breathing, that's leading. He's awake and breathing, is that correct? Ooh, that combines a couple of things. It's leading, it's appropriate clarifier, but it's also combining awake and breathing together. And then, do you know if they're breathing? Yes or no? Right? Remember, we don't ask things like, do you know or can you tell me in protocol? That changes the intent and the meaning. Do you know if she's breathing? No. No, you don't know, or no, she's not breathing. Do you see why we start to have these standards? Why we're getting in and we're saying, no, we don't want to preface things with do you know and can you tell me before or after the question? Because if it's a yes, no question, especially, we're going to make an assumption that if we don't clarify, could be wrong. But why do it anyway? It wastes time. So our old friend awake and breathing is not going to go away. So let's look at breathing as we try to explain this to a call taker, right? I'm just going to take you through if I'm giving feedback to this call taker and they had an issue with awake and breathing, whether they combined it or asked it incorrectly or recorded it incorrectly. Remember that we're doing two things when we assess the breathing on case entry. We want to know if there is breathing, period, right? We're trying to identify an immediate life threat. Secondly, we want to know the breathing quality in some cases, and that's going to typically come on key questions, but it can come in case entry. I can say, is she awake? No. Is she breathing? She's barely breathing. And of course, we all know barely breathing on an unconscious patient is ineffectively breathing. That's going to come out as an echo call. We are getting the quality on a life threat call at case entry, but typically we don't have that scenario. Typically it's a garden variety breathing problem or sick person. We've asked yes or no basically to the breathing question, but then we get into key questions on the chief complaint. And now that we're in key questions, we're looking for that quality. So here's how this manifests itself, right? On the left-hand side of the screen, I'm identifying a possible breathing life threat, but I don't have one. Is she awake? Yes. Is she breathing? Yes. And now I can go to my chief complaint. On the right-hand side of the screen, I go to the chief complaint that best addresses the primary reason for the call. And I can see I've got different breathing problems on different chief complaints, right? If I go to breathing problem, I'm looking to know, does he have difficulty speaking between breaths? That kicks a Charlie from a Delta, right? If it's a sick person, is he breathing normally? That kicks an Omega or an Alpha to a Charlie, and so on and so forth. So that breathing qualifier in key questions is what's going to drive the code, because we already know that they are or are not breathing on case entry. And if it was a life threat, we would never see key questions like this because we would be in pre-arrivals already. So the point of me going through some of these is to say, are you having dialogue with your dispatchers on this stuff when you find these deviations? And maybe it's not your veteran dispatchers, maybe it's a newbie, right? The turnover in 911 worldwide is tremendous right now. It's worse than it's ever been. We can't keep and retain and hire qualified people who stay. So we're always having that turnaround. If you've got new people and you're trying to explain this to them, you got to bring up ProQA. You got to show them these examples and take them through those test cases. You can't expect they're going to attend an EMD course and a ProQA software course and learn and retain everything that they have been taught. We know that it's Q's responsibility 50% of the time to provide that coaching, training, education, and mentoring to our dispatchers, right? I would take them in and I would show them how things work, right? So I would say, if I'm on a breathing problem on the left-hand side of the screen and I say, does he have difficulty speaking between breaths? And the answer is no, I get a 6 Charlie 1 out of that. And maybe your agency doesn't have a difference in a Charlie versus a Delta determinant code. Many in Maine did not. That's okay. But the rest of the country, a lot of agencies, the Charlie versus a Delta is a completely different response. In fact, in many centers that I work with, the determinant code itself, different levels of Charlie, descriptors have different response packages. But on the right-hand side of the screen, if I say, does he have difficulty speaking between breaths? And the caller says, yeah, he does. He's really winded. That now comes out to a 6 Delta 2. So even if there is no difference in the response, there is a difference in the code and the picture that we're painting for responders. If I'm a paramedic going to this call and I see that it's a 6 Charlie 1 versus a 6 Delta 2, or I have a base knowledge of what that means based upon reading the key questions, that's painting me a picture that, oh, this is probably going to be a workup, versus, maybe this is something that's not a life threat, et cetera, right? You're again coming back to responder intelligence. Okay, we even have an option in here that you should demonstrate. What if I say, does he have difficulty speaking between breaths? And the caller says, well, he's not verbal, right? We have a nonverbal option. Does he appear to be struggling to breathe? Would come up if I said nonverbal, right? This is how the logic sequence works. Some of you may have never had a nonverbal response to this key question, but ProQ8 can deal with these. We're only seeing that question struggling to breathe in the context of saying they're nonverbal. There are a ton of questions that dispatchers never see in protocol because they never pick answers that will populate those questions. They're hidden until that previous question prompts it to say, hey, I need a clarifier on this. Here's my clarifier, which is struggling to breathe. It's built into the actual key questions in the sequence. We have a ton of them on EFD, and people are always surprised. Wow, I've been using EFD for 4 years. I never realized that answer is triggering a different question. Yeah. Try thinking outside the box on some of those longer pick lists. I guarantee you on 77, you're going to see some interesting stuff in there. Same thing with hazmat. You're going to see some interesting stuff based upon the type of hazmat that it is. All right, question 12, and then I'll pause for any feedback. In response to awake, caller says no. In response to breathing, caller says just a little. What's the answer to the question? Survey says 7 out of 7. It is absolutely ineffective / agonal. Okay, so if you're reviewing this case and you're giving feedback to your new call taker who's been at an EMD maybe 4 weeks and is on the job taking active 911 calls with a trainer or without a trainer, as some cases will be, how do we give feedback on it, right? How do we go and provide them with that level of knowledge? Well, you take them into ProQA, do a test call. Go through, go to case entry, and then click on your additional information where I have the red arrow and show them, hey, I want to remind you that if you don't remember all of our terms for ineffective or agonal breathing, click on the additional information, even on case entry, and here they all are. They're in the center of your screen. Barely breathing, can't breathe at all, fighting for air, gasping for air, just a little. Oh, wow, just a little's on the list. Or reasonable equivalence, right? Anytime you can show a dispatcher in the protocol how to do something, that is a huge victory for you as a queue, because they're much more likely to remember that the next time, rather than putting that in an incident performance report and saying, in the future, make sure you mark this as ineffective breathing. If that's all you're doing, and I'm the dispatcher, I'm like, okay, I guess I get it. Show them, take the time to show them. It's gonna pay off in dividends. Remembering that in this example, I'm using breathing because it's the most common thing we deal with in medical. Remember from EMD class that we have a breathing spectrum. On the one side, the patient is absolutely breathing normally. And then on the 7 side, the right side, there's almost no chance of survival because the patient is not breathing. And then we have all of these ancillary levels on this spectrum, right? The purple box is just my annotation to say, when we have an unconscious patient, their likelihood of survival falls into one of 3 camps. The best chance is ineffective breathing, because I can do something about that quickly. I can start early position of patient, early CPR if it's needed. When they get to agonal breathing, there's some chance of survival. And then when they get to not breathing at all, there's almost no chance of survival. If we are old school and we are waiting until the caller reports no pulse or absence of breathing, complete apnea, we're not doing right by our patients, right? We know that out of hospital cardiac arrest survival rates are contingent upon the telecommunicator rapidly identifying ineffective breathing. The American Heart Association, every 5 years, in concert with its ILCOR standards on how we're going to do CPR, says the same thing every 5 years. Telecommunicators need to get better at identifying and dealing with ineffective breathing. They're missing cardiac arrests. They don't say it in so many words. I'm distilling it down. It's very important for us to recognize in an unconscious patient that ineffective breathing is a cardiac arrest until proven otherwise. And we're going to get to hands on chest as quickly as possible. But yet so many call takers, mostly veteran dispatchers who've been doing EMD forever, are so reluctant to make that a cardiac arrest because they don't want to be wrong. They fear getting into pre-arrival instructions too prematurely. But all we're saying here, folks, is that you follow protocol. And following protocol, if I select ineffective or agonal, I'm going to get to position the patient. Positioning the patient does not mean I am bought into CPR. When I say I want you to get him flat on his back on the floor and remove anything from under his head, many of us start to panic. Oh my God, I'm not sure this is a CPR yet. That's okay. All you're doing is positioning that patient. We're still going to do another evaluation at that point. Half the battle on a CPR is getting them positioned flat on their back on the floor. Think about how many challenges we get to that. I can't do it. He's on the bed. He's on the chair. He's too heavy. He's too this. He's too that. I'm all alone. We get a ton of barriers in that sequence. But if we wait 45, 60, 75 seconds to get there while the patient is ineffective, their breathing is deteriorating that entire time, right? For those of your call takers that use the breathing verification tool in case entry, and they're not using it correctly to try to disprove breathing, that needs immediate feedback. We don't use the breathing verification tool to prove something's not a cardiac arrest. We use it to prove the patient is breathing. The only time in case entry that we should be using the breathing verification tool is this scenario. Is he awake? No. Is he breathing? Yeah, he's breathing. Okay, what's the problem with that? The caller said no to awake, and they said, yeah. They said yes, but it's an uncertain yes. There's no confidence in their answer. Now I'm curious on case entry. Okay, let's check the breathing together. In all other cases where they give you ineffective or agonal criteria, that should be marked as ineffective or agonal. You should get an echo out of that and you should move into position the patient, right? Provided it is a medical arrest and not a trauma arrest, right? We are differentiating. On a traumatic arrest, we always go to the chief complaint that addresses the mechanism because of scene safety issues. I'm not going to tell somebody to move a patient until I know that there's no hazards, right? We have to always be clear on that. So take them through the pathways that they have on position the patient. Panel number 1, then top left of your screen, is a simple panel, right? And in 50% of the cases, we are going to choose the cursor priority. I hope everybody realizes that the green arrow is what we call cursor priority. And what the point of the green arrow is to say is that based on the information you've put into ProQA thus far, I think you want to be here, but that's not necessarily what's going to happen. Think about, I give this instruction and the caller says the patient's on the bed. I got to give unable to move patient. I'm going to click on unable to move patient, right? If it's a garden variety arrest and it's clear to you, you're going to go to compressions only. Okay. You can also choose other pathways in here, which is why I have down here, right? If I've got CPR landmarks, I could actually go there. If the patient is actually reported to be breathing, I could take a different pathway. Show them the different pathways that they can take, right? With the caution that the maintain airway is something that we have to be hyper vigilant about not overusing. The only time you should be in maintain airway, which is a very passive panel, is when the caller clearly indicates that patient is breathing effectively, right? Other times it's not clear. What about the unconscious but breathing scenario? Show them. You've given the instruction in panel C2 on the left of your screen. And after they get them down onto the floor, the caller says, "Oh, he's breathing, dispatcher." Okay, great. I'm not going to select the cursor priority. I'm going to select breathing. And what that's going to do is it's going to give me a mandatory check of their breathing. I don't trust that answer because how did we get to them in arrest on the floor in pre-CPR sequence if there wasn't a problem? So now I just say, now place your hand on his forehead, your other hand under his neck, then tilt the head back. Look at him very carefully. Can you see or hear any breathing? This is an objective way in the blind environment to try to get the caller to provide you information. Let's say they say yes. "Oh, yes, dispatcher, he's breathing. Oh, he's breathing all right." Okay, no worries. We're going to click on yes to that question, and we're going to go into panel C17. We're going to do a breathing evaluation. And now is the time that we're going to use the breathing verification tool and let the breathing verification tool be a double safety check that that patient is adequately breathing given the scenario. Right? These are those teachable moments that if we're not going through ProQA in a test call environment, we're missing the mark on early CPR for out of hospital arrest, where we can actually impact positively those patient outcomes. So we're using the tool to prove that the patient is correct. They said he was breathing, but the patient is unconscious. We're doubtful by nature. We're dispatchers. We doubt everything a caller says. I don't care if it's a police call, a fire call, or a medical call. We're always dubious, right? That's our job. It's our mindset. Be doubtful on the breathing question and provide education and training to your staff. I want to go ahead and pause here for any feedback either in a chat or unmuted to talk about this a little bit more.
Just some kudos that this has been very informative. So gonna have to change your name to Rockstar Ryan.
I don't know about that. All right, so I want to talk about some key question alterations and what the teaching points are. I've got some examples up here of some calls that I queued last week. How far did she fall was asked incorrectly as, and you said she fell out of her chair. Now, most of us would mark that as asked incorrectly. Why is it asked incorrectly? Because it's leading the caller into the answer. I have a key question on my screen and I'm leading the caller. Even though it could be construed as a clarification, it's not a clarification because I'm leading them. I'm saying, and you said, right? If I had said, and you said she fell out of her chair, is that correct? I'd give them credit for it. It'd be all right. But I really want, but where we need to go is to say, I know you told me before, but just tell me again, how far did she fall? Right? That's a gentler, a more objective way of getting the information that we want without leading the caller into what we think we heard or what we want to have heard. How about what caused the fall? Boy, is this a really important question. And I got to tell you, if your center is like a lot of centers, call takers skip this question all the time. Oh, it's accidental. And how many of you review a call and you're like, how do you know that's accidental? You didn't ask the question. And the story at case entry on Tell Me Exactly What Happened was sketchy. We didn't get a robust answer to how the fall happened. In a perfect world, the caller could actually tell you every key question and answer in response to Tell Me Exactly What Happened. But we know that that's not always the case. So here is an example. Do you know what caused this? Let's say the caller says no. Okay, no, you don't know. Like you see where we're going with this. When we say, do you know? We don't know if their reply is meaningful or not. And it's like the completely alert question. Do you know if she's completely alert? No. Or they say yes. And you're like, okay, right? Think about if it's two things and you say yes or no. right? It really complicates things. How about this one? Is there any serious bleeding? Asked as, is there any bleeding, serious bleeding like spurting or pouring? That uses the clarifier with the key question. We know we don't do that. That's asked incorrectly. Spoiler alert, most likely this year, we're actually going to see a change to this key question. Instead of saying, is there any serious bleeding, which is subjective to the caller, we're likely to have a change that says, is the bleeding spurting or pouring out? That's going to reduce over triage on the bleeding question, where we're saying serious bleeding. Well, to them, everything is serious. A paper cut could be serious to them. But if we specify the clarifier before we say serious bleeding, we might have a better shot of getting more accurate information. So that's one of the things that's likely to come this year. Question 13. Dispatcher asks, do you know if anyone is trapped or in immediate danger? Ooh, we have this all the time in fire protocol. Do you know if anyone is trapped or in immediate danger? Ten seconds on the clock. Survey says asked incorrectly. Yeah, it is not as scripted. Not as scripted is where we don't change the intent or meaning of a question. Now, we can do that all the time in ProQA. I can change up the verbiage so long as I don't change the intent or meaning. So let's talk about, why does do you know change the intent or meaning of the question, which is anyone trapped or in immediate danger? Again, the do you know is problematic because the intent of this question is not, is anybody trapped? It's, do you know if anyone's trapped? Now, let's say the call taker says no. Now, I'm going to interpret that most likely as no, no one is trapped or in immediate danger. But what if the caller really means the answer is, I don't know, but you just asked, do you know? And I'm just saying no. Do you see how we're going down a really slippery slope? And what's going to happen is, you might be right most of the time, but on a call that's really critical, you're going to be wrong in making that assumption. So we don't want to say, do you know? Or can you tell me? Is anyone trapped or in immediate danger? Because we're changing the question from the direct question to, do you know the answer? And on a yes, no question, especially, it's extremely risky to do that. We want to eliminate, can you tell me, do you know, or that you're aware of. These are examples that we see every week. So try a prepper statement. What do I mean by a prepper statement? Okay, this is something that you as Qs can bring back to your agencies, especially on EFD protocol for third-party callers. We get a ton of third-party callers on the fire protocol. And we don't have a better way to manage them yet. We are getting one this year, I promise you, especially with instructions for third parties. But all you got to do is use this prepper statement. And here are two examples. I understand you have limited information. I need to try to get as much as possible. Just answer as best you can. And now I can go into my key questions. Or how about this one? I get that you're not there. I need to try to get some quick information for the responders. It's okay if you don't know. Now, I don't like to say right off the bat, just say unknown if you don't know, because that gives the caller an out right away. I only use that if the first one fails. Mr. Jones, I understand that you're not at that accident anymore. I am going to try to get some important information for the responders. Just please answer the best you can. How many vehicles are involved? And I'm going to segue into my key questions. Now, by doing that, I am going to struggle so much less with my caller saying, I don't know. I told you I'm not there, you dummy, right? How many times have callers been fresh with you on the call because you haven't used a caller management prepper statement, which you can use at any point in the protocol? The standards say that you can use it, but we don't promote them. And as Qs, we need to promote these. When I started doing this in my own call taking years ago, I started fighting with people 90% less. It was more about, oh, now the caller gets that you get that they're not there. And the questions now suddenly make a whole lot more relevance and sense to them because you're letting them know what the intent of this information is. we typically say, don't say I have to ask you these questions. That undermines protocol. It implies that there's no value or merit whatsoever to anything you're about to ask or say. You're a bureaucrat sitting behind a desk. Phrase it as important information, because that's really what it is. They don't know that you're trying to code a call. They don't know that you're using ProQA. They don't even know what that is. They just want to give an address, tell you what's wrong, and get off the phone in most of these cases. But we know better. It's our job to find out the facts. A caller may know a lot more information than they think they know. So just acknowledge the fact that they're third party. Works in medical calls too, right? I understand you're no longer with your coworker, but this is very important. I have some information I need to get for responders. Or is there any way that you can get communication back with where the patient's at? Something like that. If it's security calling in or at a workplace, something like that.
Melissa does have something in the chat here.
Okay, go ahead.
She'd like to know what centers use to overcome QA barriers like queues providing face-to-face feedback or demonstrating appropriate use of protocols with sample calls to staff that are on different shifts and queues hesitant to give feedback, particularly in person, to a colleague with more tenure or experience.
Wow, that's a loaded one. I like it. Any takers on that one, verbally or in the chat? So no takers on the verbal, but we'll hope that somebody will put in the chat a little bit of that experience. I actually have a prompted question that's very similar to that coming up shortly. Right? Are we taking the time to provide examples of key question recording errors? We see this question all the time in ProQA Medical. What part of the body is injured? And when you go to the new ProQA, if you're on version 0.41 or later, you're going to see that we have some changes to this list. Okay. If, for example, it's a chest, neck, or head injury, we have a new question that's going to pop up. Right. And that question, chest, head, or neck, the reason why those are in the pick list as separate items, not on the, they're under the possibly dangerous umbrella, but they're separate because we need to check on the breathing status. So take your call taker in and explain that deviation. I want to show you that chest, neck, and head. Okay, if I say yes to it, it's going to prompt me, is he having any difficulty breathing? Because if I said regular, possibly dangerous, I'm never going to get the quality of the breathing question, right? What is the impact of selecting something incorrect? Because if they are having difficulty breathing and it's a head, chest, or neck injury, it's a 30 delta 4, right? We added head into that. The Academy has done a lot of research over the past 18 months on this issue about missing a breathing issue secondary to a head injury. It used to be just chest and neck that we asked that. Now we added head onto there. So explain some of those deviations and why to your call takers. All right, not asking a red scene safety question in EFD or EMD is weighted in Aqua as what type of deviation? Survey says 4 for major, 4 for critical. So think about this. Let's see who's our leaderboard. Oh, we still got Jessica at number 1. Okay. Red scene safety questions are critically weighted. We talked a lot about medical today. Let's talk about some fire examples. The items in red have a critical value. If I omit, is anyone trapped or in immediate danger? Are there any electrical hazards? Are there people or animals trapped inside the building? No matter if I perfectly execute the remainder of that call, it is a non-compliant call. Why? Right? Why does the Academy put that value on these questions? Well, We already know why. It's safety related. Safety is critical for our responders and keeping our callers and bystanders safe. So every question in the suite of ProQA has a value assigned to it with an impact weight. If I don't ask this or I get the answer wrong to this, what is the potential risk downstream, the domino effect? We have quite a few of these in medical as well, but mostly they're in fire. On the medical side, think about overdoses, think about psychiatric callers, where we have those scene safety questions built in for a reason. You might not, a call taker might get a non-compliant back and not understand, oh, I only skipped one key question. How can I be non-compliant? Well, you're going to provide them with the answer. It's because it's safety. And many of you know that the value of those questions is now listed on the incident performance report. If you're on a version of Aqua that was released within the past year, it prints out for them, right? Remember that rule 6 is the most often missed rule of all. Take them in and show them where you find the chief complaint selection rules, which is on the tabs, right? A lot of us don't use the tabs that are in ProQA, which is kind of a shame because there's a wealth of information in here. We don't need an old dusty card set, which is all going to be not updated. We're going to go into ProQA and choose that information from ProQA because it's the latest. If your call takers are struggling and they missed a heart attack symptom, take them in there. Show them not only where the heart attack symptoms are housed on protocol 10, but that we have to be careful of interpreting what the caller is saying. If they've got chest tightness or heaviness, that's a heart attack symptom for us. We are going to go to protocol 10, right? Remember, we have a statement down here. While these symptoms are most common in the chest, they may also be present in the arms, jaws, neck, or upper back. These symptoms should be considered equivalent to chest pain and handled on protocol 10. Take them in and show them. That's that training. Talk about barriers. They're opportunities, right? Callers and call takers have barriers to CPR and managing unconscious patients. Callers are apprehensive or not sure, and we're apprehensive and not sure. We have the same exact barriers on both sides, curiously. But are we training through quality assurance our call takers to overcome barriers, right? Especially on the I don't want to side. Here's some barriers to hands-on chest. Here's our caller barriers. There's physical barriers, environmental barriers. They're not convinced CPR is necessary. My two favorites, he's got a pulse. The pulse check has been gone over a decade now on American Heart Guidelines for CPR. But we still people asking, oh, does he have a pulse? Or the caller volunteers, the patient has a pulse, and we take that as gospel. It's irrelevant to us these days. We go by the unconsciousness status and the breathing report. Okay, fear of causing harm to the patient, so the patient's a stranger. Self-doubt, physical disability, fear of disease. Well, COVID kind of changed that, but we don't do really hands mouth to mouth anymore. Emotions and anxiety. But look on the right side, the call taker barriers. Most often overlooked signs of arrest. We missed ineffective or agonal breathing at case entry. But like our callers, we have some similarities. We're not convinced CPR is necessary. Oh my gosh, I just coded this a 9 echo 1 and I'm at C1, position the patient. No, I don't want to be here. Yes, you do. Go there. Position the patient is half the battle to CPR is getting them on the floor. 50% of the time, you're not going to have to do hands-on chest, but we want you in that panel, want you in that sequence because you're going to need it a lot of the time. My favorite on this list is just an overdose. You know, heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, the epidemic, which is raging everywhere in the nation right now. Oh, it's just an overdose. They're unconscious and ineffectively breathing. That's the point at which the dispatcher is going to make meaningful impact. It's not when that respiratory suppressed patient is magically going to wake up, right? Their breathing is deteriorating without naloxone or other caller management. They're likely to fade away, which is why so many people per year are dying of overdoses, right? And in many of those cases where the 911 call is made, the dispatcher has missed the ineffective criteria and they camp out and maintain and monitor. I want you to watch him very closely and look for any changes. We're not doing anything for the patient when we camp out in that panel. Be proactive. If it's an overdose arrest, use the overdose arrest fast track, which gets us into the naloxone Narcan instructions. And if they have that, we'll tell them how to administer it. It's real easy, but we can't get there if we don't do it. So remember what our mission is, especially in the context of cardiac arrest, right? We want to get more hands on chest. We want to overcome barriers. Here are some examples of barriers that we hear all the time, and here are ways that which we can combat them. My favorite on this list is, but he's kind of breathing, or he's got a pulse. I understand, but he's not breathing effectively. When we get pushback on hands on chest, we need to overcome that pushback, right? And these items might help you. They are not scripted. We don't have to be 100% scripted. These are clarifications and enhancements to protocol to get the caller to do what we want them to do. They're not freelances. We should never be marking them as freelances. In fact, when we hear a call taker overcome using one of these similar phrases, we need to give them accolades for thinking outside the box and using protocol as a framework, but not an absolute framework. Put your spin on it. Of course, pre-arrivals have to be scripted, the actual instructions, of course. We have a standard that says so, but enhancing the script with these statements, these prepper statements as well, can be pretty important.
Ryan, I transferred over a question from Teams to the AHA. Do you see it?
I don't see it. You want to relay it for me?
Laura says, now I'm confused. When do we mark something as an incorrect clarifier versus marking the question asked incorrectly? I don't have Aqua right in front of me, so maybe I'm overthinking it.
Yeah, so if the key question is on the screen and the verbiage is changed, that's just asked incorrectly. If they are referring back to something earlier in the sequence, it's an inappropriate clarifier, right? So if they're seeing it on the screen, I want to ask it as scripted or put the answer in as obvious. And an example of that might be on the what caused the fall. I might say at case entry, you said he fell from the bed to the floor. Is that correct? That is an appropriate clarifier. I'm referring back and I'm ending it with an is that correct? When I see that question on my screen and I change the verbiage to say, you said he fell from the bed to the floor, that's asked incorrectly because the key question's on my screen. So there is a subtle difference there. I hope that helps explain it a little bit better. You might be overthinking a little bit, but it depends upon in Aqua when they saw that question, or if they're just referring it back to it and not in relation to the question on their screen. And that's where sequences can actually help you. I actually have a document about inappropriate clarifiers that I can send to you, Corey, and you can send it out to the group. It's by Kim Rigdon from the Academy. And it's a lot more detail of what I just explained. So that should probably help as well. Okay, so kind of coming to the conclusion of the training end of this, right? If the goal at the end of the day, especially on our critical calls, is more hands on chest, and I think that is our goal, right? Our shared goal. We want to be mindful of this refusal pyramid, right? That the patients start out as uncertain, then they resist, then they refuse, and then they finally say bye. We have almost no chance when they get to the point of hanging up or passing the phone to somebody else, of impacting dispatch life support. Our best chance is when they're simply uncertain or apprehensive. Well, I'm not really sure, or I'm worried about this, or I can't do it. That's where we need the telecommunicator to jump in and say, stop. Yes, you can do this. I'm going to walk you through it. Listen to my instructions. I want you to get her flat on the back on the floor and remove anything from under her head. That's the type of approach that we're talking about, is overcome that resistance. Encourage your callers. In fact, protocol has reassurance and extra reassurance built into the tabs. Nobody ever looks at those tabs down below, but they have examples of things that you can say. You're not limited to that list. I just gave you a couple of slides of things that you can say that are not scripted, right? But if you want to stick, there are lots of things in there that you could be teaching your call takers. Here's some examples of some unscripted enhancements that we should never be marking in queue as freelance. Put me on speaker. Roll him onto his back. Who else can help you? Drain the tub. This one is a real interesting one. I don't have really time to get into it, but yeah, that makes total sense. If the caller is reporting an unresponsive in a bathtub, you're not going to find that in a script. It's common sense. It's an enhancement to the protocol. Turn the machine off. You got somebody trapped in a machine and they're unconscious. right? If we went to EFD, we'd actually have an instruction about it. But let's say it came in on EMD side. Don't touch the gun on a shooting. And the caller says, well, the gun's right next to him. I can't move him without touching the gun. All right, we're going to try to tell him not to touch the gun. Inspirational. You can do this. I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. Listen to my instructions. The only chance you have is to try, and we'll do this together. Here's one for you. Dispatcher asks, do you have a defibrillator there? Instead of, if there's a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it. How do we review this? All right. 6 said asked incorrectly and 2 said not as scripted. So it is asked incorrectly. That is an instruction. It is not a question. We don't intentionally want dialogue on this, right? When I say, do you have a defibrillator there? And the caller has no idea what I'm talking about, and they're in a residential setting, the best response is obviously something like, don't worry about it. The paramedics are going to bring one. You start opening up the door to a dialogue about the defibrillator. 30 seconds later, you're still trying to explain what it is. And it's a residential setting where it's unlikely, but possible that there's an AED there. So that's why, again, we have to get on that bandwagon of saying everything that's scripted has an intent behind it. The precise word choice is such that we're saying this is an if statement because 90% of the places we go don't have an AED. So if there's a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now and tell me when you have it. Or in some cases on a Delta, in case we need it later. It's not a question. We don't want to have too much extraneous dialogue on it. So here's that instruction, right? Don't paraphrase it into a question. If it's residential, especially. Now, you're going to get callers to say, what's that? Huh? An AE who? Right? You think about all the different things that you get in response to that. It's because we're asking it as a question. So say it as a statement or an instruction. And then if it's a commercial or public setting, troubleshoot it. Think critically. The patient's at Walmart, a school, a church, a hotel. There's likely to be an AED in all of those locations. I would troubleshoot it more, right? I would say it's the shock box. It's the sign with the heart and the lightning bolt on it. Tell someone else who works there to go get the AED if they have one, because you're pretty certain that there would be an AED in that location, right? You have to troubleshoot things. We're saying you have to follow protocol, but you can enhance protocol. And as cues, we need to get better at letting them have some freedom to enhance the protocol, given the context of a commercial or public setting versus a residential. Not to say that we've never had residential settings where there's an AED. In fact, we're seeing a huge increase in that nationwide. People are now going to CVS and Walgreens and buying AEDs for their home use. They could have a volunteer firefighter or EMT that has one in their vehicle. You don't know, don't assume. Protocol is all about not assuming. What are we doing in terms of staying on the line, and how do we promote staying on the line for our callers, especially if it's first or second party, right? Those are all types of things that we should be considering when we give cue feedback. DLS links. You didn't stay on the line. The patient had delta chest pain. That patient's unstable by definition. It's a delta chest pain, a delta, a delta breathing problem, seizure. Those should be attempting to stay on the line. So to that vein, dispatchers must attempt to stay on the line for all of the following except. Ten seconds. Survey says fall, still on the ground. Very good. Unconscious, delta chest pain, difficulty breathing, sick person not alert are all attempt to stay on the line. Notice I'm very careful in my word choice when I say attempt to stay on the line, right? Because even though the standard doesn't say attempt, that's literally what it is. When we're busy, when we're understaffed, when we're 2 on a shift and I've got a police event going or a structure fire and I get a medical call, I may not have the luxury of staying on the line with every one of them, even though I'd like to. But we still have to follow protocol and stay on the line and use urgent disconnect to appropriately disconnect that caller and move on to the next thing. So long as they use urgent disconnect and give the verbiage, I have to let you go to take another call. Help is on the way. She was less awake and vomits. Go get roller on the side. Call us back if anything gets worse. Right? I'm paraphrasing. That's what it says. We give that. We go on about our lives. We're good. We followed the standardized care and provided the DLS link. Man, Jessica's rocking this. 1,131 points, followed by T and Monique. Awesome. So remind your dispatchers, here's the criteria for staying on the line. Critical situations, priority symptoms, patient is not alert. The not alert question is on all but 2 chief complaints. You can have a sick person not alert, abdominal pain not alert. We have to attempt to stay on line. And other situational examples, suicidal, elderly alone, child caller, that's discretionary. Right? You need to consider staying on line with those as well. And that is going to bring us to our last and shortest module on feedback. So I'm going to jump into strengths-based feedback and show you a couple of things about that, and kind of understand what it is that we are trying to convey. So there are 3 things we want to tell every call taker to do. We want to tell them what they did well. We want to tell them how they can improve, and we want to tell them how and why to do it better the next time. Here's an example. Caller was reporting his neighbor's house was on fire. Great work using reassurances earlier in the call as the caller was very excited. Quote, I need you to slow down and give me very specific information. And while that's happening, my dispatcher is getting the fire department on the way, okay? EFD protocol key questions and PDIs were given perfectly. This was excellent. In the future, be sure to use the Echo Fast Track at case entry instead of going the long way via Chief Complaint 69, because the Fast Track for structure fire is a 0 question send point and gets the call coded in CAD for dispatch the fastest possible way. Put a test case into EFD and see how much faster it is. So in a perfect world, this is how all of our feedback is structured. What did I do well? Well, I told you what you did well. You reassured the caller. Okay. I put the impact of that. I also mentioned that they did something well in terms of the key questions and PDIs. And then I pivot to something that's based upon a future event. In the future, be sure to use the Echo Fast Track. Why? Because ... Okay. When we do that on any call that's non-compliant, low compliant, partial compliant, that's a win. Because we're not just telling them what to do, we're telling them the why, and we're telling them the impact of why we're saying that that's a better pathway. We're not retrospective, we are forward looking. So this is both future forward feedback and strengths-based feedback combined into one. Those 2 models shouldn't be used exclusively as independents. They should be combined together into one model, right? And that's sort of what's breaking it down. So I want to talk about some examples of feedback and why they might be ideal or not ideal. Caller was reporting a lady out in front of the store who said her legs were numb. You selected protocol 28 stroke to process the call. Keep in mind moving forward that the reported numbness paralysis typically affects only one side of the body. That's why the selection criteria in KQs give answers with one side only in parentheses. Whenever possible, have the caller who is right with the patient ask the patient to tell them exactly what happened so that the most accurate information can be obtained. So there's your why and there's your explanation. Okay, protocol 26 sick person would have been a more appropriate chief complaint based on the information provided. Why? Information was gathered and instructions given clearly while staying on the line until units were right with the patient. Brush this one off and get the next one. This is a non-compliant due to a couple of things that happened, right? So we're giving them the story. Here's a quick recap, 1 sentence of what the call was. Here's what you did. Here's what you did well, and here's what you need to do in the future. It basically follows the model that we're discussing. Another example, Candace, the caller stated he drove through the area and noticed smoke around a chemical tank. The call was processed on protocol 68. Great job communicating effectively with the caller. By telling the caller, I'm going to ask you a few more questions, then I'll let you go. I just need some help going through some things. If you don't know the answers, it's okay to say unknown and we'll keep going. The caller is aware questions will be asked. He knew it was okay to answer unknown. Taking this step to inform the caller it was okay to state unknown further assures the caller that you were aware the information might be limited. Right? That's just like the prepper statements that we talked about earlier. This can minimize frustrations for callers as they're reporting incidents. Well done. Yeah. And here's a compliant call. But even though it's compliant, we're saying there's still something, that's done well and something that could obviously be something we promote in the future. I want you to do this again when the similar thing comes up. Brian or Laura, caller was an alarm company operator reporting a fall detector with no patient contact. Brian did a good job getting address and phone number verified. Then Laura took over. Obviously, this was a trainee. Protocol 32 unknown problem was selected. However, the operator advised it was an alarm for a fall detection. Based on Rule 2 on Protocol 32, it would have been more appropriate to go to Protocol 17 falls and dispatch from there. Moving forward, remember to go all the way through case exit instructions in ProQA so that the fourth party instructions can be given as written and captured as given in case sequences. So we have some strength here. He did a good job with address and phone number for this trainee. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more strengths-based information in here, what they did well. But overall, this does meet the standard of telling them what happened objectively, giving them some kudos, and then moving into, in the future, do this because this is what's going to happen when you do it. That's always a win when we can do that. Here's another one of my favorites. Sarah, caller was reporting a patient who was bleeding from his catheter in his penis. Moving forward, remember that when bleeding is reported, it should be prompt you to consider protocol 21 for hemorrhage. Notice consider, right? That's an important word because we're not locking them into a specific chief complaint. As the chief complaint, you selected protocol 26 sick person to process the call. Information was gathered. However, moving forward, be mindful that information given by the caller is recorded accurately. Instructions were given clearly. And here's your in the future. Focus on actively listening to the caller from the beginning to the end and not just hearing something that can be recorded and immediately moving on. Shake this off, review the notes and applying forward. Here's what I like about this call, the teaching moment. There was a customer service issue with this call. The caller ended up hanging up on the call taker. When a caller disconnects the line for whatever reason, keep in mind that it is not about you. She even apologized when you got her back on the line, which rarely ever happens. But unfortunately, it seemed to have already been taken personally. The call taker got really huffy when she established contact back with the caller. So anytime that you can put in a teaching moment and phrase it like that, without a deviation or in addition to a deviation, that is a huge victory for you and for your Q program. Right? We want them to understand that they don't have to take this personally and that they should not take it personally. We want to stay focused and professional, just like the comment says. We're big on teaching moments and putting into the comments, especially if you cannot get to face-to-face one-on-one feedback every week. If the call takers are getting these, at least there's something in there for them to take away, whether or not you physically meet with them. Taylor, this call was from a male reporting that his fiance was pregnant and having pain in her stomach. Absolutely beautiful call evaluation from beginning to end. Amazing work returning to is there any serious bleeding? To update the information as the caller had stated the patient had been spotting. The caller requested you to stay on the line as the patient felt as though she was going to pass out, etc. And that's a compliant call, but we're still giving strength-based feedback, right? We don't need any future forward. This call is compliant. If it was less compliant, we would put in some future forward feedback as well. David, the caller, was a third-party caller reporting a bellowing of flames and smoke in the area. Multiple attempts to gather information were made prior to disconnecting the questioning. Questioning was correctly discontinued after several attempts to gain information from the caller were made. The questions were only discontinued when it was obvious the caller had no further information. That's a huge win on a high compliant call to tell them to reinforce the behavior that you want them to continue to do. We have to give them feedback on high compliance, just like non-compliance. For this reason, that reinforces the expectation for the next time. Simple one on alarm company. Caller was from an alarm monitoring company reporting a fire alarm. Excellent job explaining the gaps in the conversation, stating, quote, some of the stuff you have already given to me. So I'm just going to be inputting it in without having to ask you repeat a question. Perfect. Alarm companies are softball calls. They know we have questions to ask. We can go through 52 on a fire alarm just fine, 95% of the time without any problems. I want to get to one that has exemplary. Here's a really good example of that because we've got 7 minutes left. This caller reported that his house was on fire. Excellent job utilizing the Echo reported building structure fire fast track from case entry 4. This helped to launch an immediate response. So cause and effect. In this call, you offered repeated action, reason, reassurance statements. This was a great way to help keep the caller calm and focused. You moved with a sense of urgency as you obtained key question information. Great job pausing to deliver PDIs like, do not try to put the fire out. When the caller mentioned he was going to, quote, shoot some water on it. All possible and appropriate PDIs were correctly delivered. And here's why this was an exemplary performance. And some of you may have never used exemplary performance in Aqua before, and I would encourage you to try to use it more often. Caller management. Matthew did an excellent job reassuring and explaining what was happening to the caller. Example, early on when the caller said to get them there quickly, Matthew said, quote, I understand we're going to get them dispatched out to that location. I've already got them dispatched. Matthew also used the caller's name to get his attention and provide continued reassurances that help was coming. Outstanding. And then for protocol usage, we had another exemplary on this call. Matthew kept the caller out of danger by using the instructional sequence in EFD to caution the caller against trying to put the fire out when the caller instructed he was going to attempt to extinguish it himself. Okay. When the caller handed off the call to another person in the house, Matthew reiterated those PDIs. Perfect. You know, we're reiterating PDIs because the caller got passed to another one. How many of you have call takers that will do that? Now it's a new person. They don't know what PDIs have already given them on that medical or fire call, right? We are playing to their strengths. We're also looking for future behavior, modification, or continuance. And that's exactly what these examples show. Catch them doing it right. That's our motto. We're not commenting to jam them up or to say they did a bad job. We're commenting to build up their confidence in continuing to use the protocol, which continues to evolve every year and get better and better based upon user experience. And that really is the heart of what we're trying to do, is measure, provide feedback, and mentor our dispatchers so that they become stronger and provide better service to our community, reduce our risk, and have that mindset of accreditation of best practices. That's where the heart of Q is at. And that's exactly why we met today, was kind of come back to the basics, why we're doing this philosophically, along with some very specific examples that we deal with every day in Q to kind of make sure that we're on the same page, especially if it's been a long time since you've had any sort of workshop or refresher in Q. All right, so I'm going to stop here for today and open it up for any feedback or specific questions either in the chat or verbally. Before we go ahead and adjourn and go on to the next one.
Does anybody have any questions, concerns, some things that come up in your centers that you'd like? Although, I think the True to Q Facebook group has taken the place of that. People seem to ask their questions that come up in centers there. Do you notice that stays pretty active, Ryan?
I know a lot of people use it. I would caution you, and I am not a member of it any longer because the amount of misinformation on there from the peanut gallery is extensive. So most of us on the National Q side stopped going in there because we were getting super frustrated with people putting up answers and getting likes on it that were totally incorrect. I will say this about True to Q. If an answer has been answered by somebody like Kim Rigdon or Brian Dale, you can take it to the bank. There are also some other reliable people who are chronic posters and repliers. But Joe Blow from out somewhere who says something that might seem questionable, don't take that to the bank. You need to question it further or reach out for more clarification because there is a lot of misinformation. It is not a truly 100% moderated platform.
Okay. I'm not sure how many people monitor that, so that's good to know.
Yeah, and Brian Dale, who was the director of quality assurance, he is now the president of Priority Dispatch, so he's out of that role now. So he's really not monitoring very much, I don't think anymore. But Kim does try to get in there every week.
Okay.
And Kim and Brian wrote our standards, so there's a lot of reliability.
So any questions, go right to the source. Probably send you an email or send me an email and I'll shoot it up the chain. Would that be your recommended?
Yeah, you
Course of
always,
action?
yeah, always.
Okay. Laura has two things. I was gonna say we can't have a meeting without Laura having a question. Come on. So Laura's got just two. That's good. All right. Go with the
Yeah,
first one.
just two. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. One is just took a report of an electrical outlet that exploded, single wide mobile home, no flames, no smoke. We're just trying to determine what protocol was the most appropriate.
Structure fire.
Okay.
Now,
We weren't
why
sure
do
we
you?
were back and forth with electrical versus structure.
Yeah, and here's why I'm going to say structure fire in that category. And here's where context is key. It's a mobile home or trailer, highly inflammable, and usually very tragically. So while in an ordinary structure like a house or a commercial setting, I might be able to see 55 for electrical hazard. The fact is that the risk of not handling that on structure fire is a miscoding of the call and not getting to post-dispatch instructions, which can change rapidly. The outlet exploded. That to me definitely falls under structure fire. We wouldn't say explosion because the structure hasn't exploded, but think about the risk and why we would coach somebody to say, yeah, go to 69 just to be on the safe side because we have electrical hazard, electrical problem on that pick list for 69 for that reason. I'm going to share my screen
Okay,
real quick on
thank you.
that one. I want to show you guys something on that. Let me just share real quick and then I'll take your follow-up because this is a really important one. I'm so glad that you asked that question. Okay, so I don't have to use echo structure fire for this one, right? I can use regular structure fire. And I'm going to go down here and let's just say I'm going to use mobile home in this case. Are you at that location now? Yes. Do you see flames or smoke? This is why we're saying go to 69 because look what I have on my list. I've got electrical problem down here under structure fire, which is going to get me a structure fire code and therefore a response as opposed to going to 55 for electrical. Everything on this pick list comes out to a suffix. So when we don't have a clear structure fire echo on case entry, we go the longer route because burn, food, electrical problem, chimney, appliance fire are examples of things that don't have to be a full response. In fact, up in Maine, you guys are famous for chimney fires are a much lesser response than a house fire. And that's protocol gives you that advantage. You can send a different response to a C suffix on 69 than you would a light smoke or smoke or flames suffix on a structure fire. Does that help?
It helps me, thank you.
Okay, each one of these R through O. And the reason we have that pick list is because we can have a different response configuration for every single one of these. Now, when we did our fire implementations, most agencies opted not to change those responses. But if they're having over triage and they're going to structure fire after structure fire, that is not a structure fire. That is a queue and an operator issue with how we're putting those calls into ProQA. We could have a whole hour on that discussion, but maybe for the next one. All right, and what was the follow-up to that, Laura?
We had one other call that came in that we had a discussion about. Caller reporting a patient, 59-year-old male, was reporting general illness, had a fever and convulsions the night before, but was reporting his temperature was at 94.5, and then his doctor wanted him brought in. So what protocol would be the most appropriate?
So based only on what you're saying, sick person would be fine. However, the teaching that needs to come out of that is we need to try to clarify a little bit more. Sick person is going to do a check of all 4 priority symptoms from altered level through pain and obviously chest pain, bleeding, and breathing check. So that's one where it could go either way, but we want a clarification to it. Tell me more about what's happening with him right now, or ask him what's bothering him the most right now. Right? We want them to open up a little bit more.
And the follow-up we had to that with, because we did end up going with 26, what is the most appropriate alpha level at that point? Because it did end up asking us to choose an alpha level.
Probably unwell ill. Probably unwell ill, but in that descriptor list, there could be multiple things that could be gotten. No priority symptoms could be another option for that. We could answer no and get that to 26 alpha 1, no priority symptoms. But I would say unwell ill probably the best. That's an underutilized descriptor for catching the stuff like that. General sickness and weakness. General weakness might be another option too. So there could be different things. If there was pain,
I think we have an issue where people tend to overutilize general illness a lot that seems to be the catch-all on 26 for everything. Even if there is something that's very blatantly fits something else, we still have a tendency to go to unwell. So that's something I've been working on.
Yeah, it's tough. It really is. Sometimes there's just more than one place, but a CDE that you're working on would be great for them, and give them some examples and some clear expectations for next time.